Good evening. And I'd like to call to order the February 12th, 2024 meeting of the East Bend School District Board of School Directors. We now all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, our first item on the agenda, a request to address the board. We have two this evening. So before I call people to the podium, I'm going to read the following statement. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with public comment, speakers should feel free to express their opinion, comment, or question, and understand that this is not an interactive engagement with the board or with the administration. Please direct your comments to the chair. Be respectful, not engage in profane rhetoric, and be mindful that others, including students, may be listening. I would request that you consider that protocol when making your comments. For the members of the audience, please also be respectful and refrain from speaking during the public comment period. With that, I will now announce each speaker and their topic. When you step up to the podium, again, state your name, and you will have 3 minutes within which to speak, and I will give you a 30-second warning when your time is going to be up. Our first speaker this evening is Sarvesh Sengutavan to talk about Emmaus Academic Team National Competition Trip Approval.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Sarvesh Sengutavan, and I am a senior and the captain of the Emmaus Academic Team. 2 weeks ago, the academic team was told that our trip to compete in the Quiz Bowl national competition in New Orleans was not approved by administration, and we would not be able to go. So I am here to ask you to review that decision. We have worked hard all year to qualify for this competition, and we were disheartened to hear that those efforts were all for nothing. We have spent a lot of time and money attending competitions during weekends under the impression that they will culminate in a nationals trip in May. The academic team has gone to nationals for many years, and we are confused and saddened that this year our request to go was rejected. We were told that this rejection was due to the fact that we will miss 2 days of school soon before finals, but our team is composed of students taking many AP classes and seniors of A's, 2 groups which are exempt from finals. The majority of students who planned on going are not even taking a single final come June. Last year, the team made the quarterfinals of the national competition, and we are excited to represent Emmaus once again. But more importantly, this is the type of learning experience that can't be taught from a book. Things like independence, accountability, camaraderie, and preparation. Each student and their parents understand the time commitment and cost related to this trip, and they are still willing to go. We have had 9 eager students turn in completed forms and deposits to go, and I sincerely hope they can have the opportunity. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our second speaker this evening is William Zhang, also talking about Emmaus Academic Team National Competition Trip Approval.
Hello, my name is William Zhang, and as I was introduced before, I'm a current academic team member as well as a junior in the school. We are a group of dedicated students who would love to bring accolades and glory back to our school. We have dedicated multiple hours a day for practice and preparation for our competition. Personally, I have been studying up to as much as 6 hours a day in preparation for a future competition. This dedication has been sparked by the news of our team being registered in a national competition. I'm pretty confident in saying that many of our team members have done the same since this intriguing news. I've seen in company multiple members studying late at night for this event, but our hopes have been rained out since the news of the possible denial of our national trip. Many of our members are frustrated in seeing this after hundreds of hours of studying, hence why we're here. As qualifying for the national is hard enough, not being able to go to the national competition while being qualified is devastating for our team. All of our members were looking forward to this competition and would be very grateful if the trip was approved. If this trip was approved, we'd be able to see our improvement from our studying on a national level or bring honor to our school. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes requests. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the January 22nd, 2024 regular board meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next is the district update from our superintendent, Dr. Campbell.
Good evening. I'm going to start by doing something which is very atypical, specifically because we have several students. I think I see 5 students who are with us, 2 of whom spoke during public comment. I just wanted to take the opportunity to explain that I can appreciate that as someone who might come and make comment during public comment, it can be a little bit awkward simply because the board and I do not respond. And so I just wanted to sort of use this as a teachable moment and explain that the public comment really is one-sided. It's intended to be an opportunity for members of the community to speak about a particular item. It is not intended for discussion or interaction with the board or myself and anyone who speaks. And so I just wanted to give our students the courtesy of knowing that information. That doesn't mean that we don't care. And certainly we will follow up with building administration and you will hear from someone. So I just wanted to explain that to our students who are here. Hopefully to our 5 students, as well as others in the community, you may have heard the news that we made the call earlier this evening that as a result of the weather, that it's expected throughout the day tomorrow to make things a little bit messy for our region. The district will have a flexible instructional day tomorrow for any students or family members who might need a reminder about our FID expectations. Those guidelines are available on our district as well as our school website. I have quite a few highlights and celebrations that I want to start off with this evening. The overarching theme here is that February is Career and Technical Education Month. And so there are many ways in which LCTI and our students continue to really excel in their particular program. And so I wanted to highlight several of those events in which our students recently competed through LCTI. Specifically, we had 3 Emmaus High School students who qualified to participate in next month's Pennsylvania DECA Career Development Conference, which is being held in Hershey. And so we have Damian Arndt, who qualified under the Advertising Design and Commercial Art category, Dominic Ruggieri, who qualified under Marketing and Entrepreneurship, and Jacob Walker, who qualified under the Supply Chain and Management and Logistics portion of the competition. So good luck to them. We also recently had several students who did an excellent job at the Skills USA District 11 Championship that was held last month. That was held at Ag Hall, and again, we had several students who amazed us with their great work. Brooklyn House took 2nd place in the category of teacher education. We'll be looking to her for future years. James Leap took 3rd place in criminal justice. Lola Shoup took 1st place in cosmetology. And Shannon Yard earned a 3rd place in cosmetology. We also have several LCTI students who qualified for the Pennsylvania FBLA State Leadership Conference, which is held in April. So congratulations to our students who qualified for that state level conference. Kylie McLean, who's qualified under Computer Information Technology. Thomas Early, also under Computer Information and Technology. And Zion Lamb under Cabinet Making and Millwork. In addition to our LCTI students who are doing tremendous work, I also wanted to highlight our girls wrestling program. As you know, girls wrestling is a new club sport for us this year. in the district, and Emmaus girls recently took second place at the Palmerton tournament. Bethany Reichard came in fourth in that tournament, and Peyton Schneck took first in that tournament. So our girls are doing awesome things in wrestling. I'm also excited to share that our Lower Macungie Middle School Math Counts team recently placed 8th at the regional competition, which is a tremendous accomplishment given the wide number of students who participate at that particular level. We also have several Emmaus High School art students who recently completed in the Regional Scholastic Art Awards, and our students received 13 gold keys, 22 silver keys, and 40 honorable mentions. Kyra Murphy, one of our students, also received the American Visions nominee, which is similar to a Best in Show for the art show, and a piece of her work will be shown at the national level. There are several exciting events that are coming up in the district. In particular, our World Language Department on February 13th, that's tomorrow. Stay tuned, that may have to be rescheduled. They're holding an informational meeting for a trip that they are planning to Panama and Costa Rica. That trip isn't set for until June 2025, so we're well over a year. Any current 8th to 11th graders, parents, or faculty who might be interested in participating in that summer trip, you can reach out to Mrs. Hess from the Emmaus High School for information. We're also really excited. On February 29th, we are hosting a special education parent coffee hour that's being held here in the administration building. And our special education administration is really interested in bringing together parents of students with disabilities to hear more about many topics related to special education as well as our process here in the district. So again, that's February 29th from 9:30 to 10:30. While it's still winter, we're very much looking forward to spring because spring means that we have some of our great shows coming up from our theater departments. So very late winter, IRE will be putting on their version of Mean Girls Junior. That's scheduled for February 29th to March 2nd. Tickets are available online. It's very convenient. We encourage you to check it out. There's also a candle sale sponsored by our Jasper program that's connected with Mean Girls, so you have to check out the swag to support Mean Girls. Emmaus High School theater department is performing Cinderella March 20th to the 24th. I encourage the community to take a look at or consider joining us for any number of the shows. We have matinees as well as evening performances. A reminder to our senior citizens, if you have your gold card, you are eligible for a complimentary performance on Tuesday, the evening of Tuesday, March 19th. If you're a senior citizen and you don't have a gold card, contact the district office to be sure to take advantage of that great opportunity. Kindergarten registration for next year, believe it or not, opens on March 1st. Again, it's an online process. We've streamlined it very much. Parents can go online and begin completing the paperwork. If you have any questions, you could reach out to our central registration or any of our buildings, and we're happy to talk you through the process and look forward to those 5-year-olds coming to us and registering as soon as possible. We're also excited to share that the Career Exploration Fair, which is sponsored by the East Penn Education Foundation, is scheduled for Tuesday, March 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. in the high school auditorium. Phenomenal opportunity for students in our community of any age to come meet professionals in a variety of careers and learn about their pathway and how they got to where they are. And again, we have some exciting raffles and things like that will be that evening. Also coming up, we're excited to be bringing back Shave for the Brave. That event is scheduled for March 26th at 5 p.m. at the high school track. Join our community in coming together to raise $100,000 to fight childhood cancer. I will say, you do know we surpass that amount every single year. This is a phenomenal community event that we encourage you to learn more about it and think how you might be involved. Again, that's scheduled for April 25th. If you want to know more about that, you can also reach out to Mrs. Petrunak or Mrs. Kaunitz from the high school. Believe it or not, we're starting to think about end of the school year already, and our Education Foundation is sponsoring our senior sale, our senior sign sale. That would be for any current Emmaus High School seniors who will be graduating. We are also sponsoring an 8th grade graduation or sign sale as well. Information, the sale is on through May 13th. If you would like to order, you can visit the district website, high school website, or middle school sites for more information. We are also getting ready to begin recognizing some of our amazing Emmaus High School graduates via our Grad Spotlight program. Those nominations are open today, and nomination forms can be found on our district website. And finally, we have a special guest. Actually, we have a lot of special guests with us tonight, but I believe sitting in the back, we have Mr. Mahalik, who has been, I want to say, really the founder or coordinator of the East Penn Therapy Dog Program. And by his side tonight is Branch, one of our therapy dogs. This program came to us Mike brought this program to East Penn in the 21-22 school year. It's been several years now, and I invite Mr. Mahalik to come up, and he's just going to spend just a very few minutes sort of taking a walking us through how this program has positively impacted our students and our staff over the past several years.
Good evening. Like Dr. Campbell said, it was 3 years ago that I think did the first presentation about the therapy dog program. So it's, I think, just going to keep this really simple and give a real quick overview of what we've been able to accomplish in 3 years. So I actually took this slide from the original presentation where our main goal was to provide support for our students in a lot of different ways and just add to the atmosphere of Emmaus High School. And you can see I have a bunch of pictures in these slides, just what the dogs are able to do to our, for our students at all 3 levels. So we do have 3 dogs. This is Branch tonight. He's at the high school. Tokyo is a black lab. He's at the middle school. And then we have Mario, who's a beagle. He goes to the 7 different elementary schools. So we've been able to utilize the dogs in a lot of different ways. By no means have all of the dogs done all of these different things because they have different jobs, different responsibilities, depending at the level they're at, but they've been able to greet students as they arrive to the buildings. Branch spends most of his time in emotional support classrooms at the high school, which is pretty neat. The dogs have visited the step rooms. They've gone on just general classroom visits. They've done some work with community and schools in different small groups. They've attended school events. They've been used for behavioral incentives for kids. Some of the elementary kids have been racking up a lot of tickets to spend some time with the dogs. They've been, in some cases, some students have been able to read with the dogs next to them. They've been used for reentry meetings for kids that have been hospitalized and coming back into our schools. They've been used on the spot for de-escalation when needed. The counselors have used them. They've also been members of our flight team. Unfortunately, when we have some tragedies in the district, that they've been used to be able to offer support at those really critical times. And then they've also been able to join the Vespa room. And then we could add on to the list emotional support for administrators at board meetings now tonight. So here's a picture of Mario greeting some kids when they're coming into Shoemaker Elementary. You can see Branch. That's kind of Branch top right. That's kind of what he does in the hallways. It's that unexpected greeting that some students get a chance to see him. Like I said, that unexpected surprise. I mentioned before they attend the different school events. But some of the kids have, they definitely formed relationships with the different dogs. Some of them have been able to access them more. I would love for every kid to be able to access all of them a little bit more often, but they've done a great job with with what we've asked them to do and the different roles and responsibilities that we've given them. And you can see here, just, the kids seem pretty comfortable with the dogs by their side. Here's some more. There's Tokyo on the left. And so when I said before, the students being able to read next to the dogs, it's a pretty special picture in the bottom right-hand corner. So there are, a student recently actually wrote some statements about the value that Branch has offered emotional support. So you can see some pretty neat quotes right there taken from the schools, especially just, I think to sum these up, when they need support in a way that an adult can't offer, the dogs have been able to do that, which is a great thing that we're able to offer those students. And then Branch also, just going back to the point of the program, add to the atmosphere. I was really proud when Branch made the stinger, because then, we can, that was proof that we've kind of made it. So if you want quotes from Branch, we'll pull up that old Stinger article and you can see what he had to say. And then 3 years ago, I had this up there to kind of provide what success would look like in the program, and I think we've been able to do a lot of those things. Some kids have felt like the dogs gave them a reason to go to school that day. There's a crisis avoided with a de-escalation. Sometimes when you get the C branch, it's not expected, it just makes your day. But a lot of these things up here we've been able to accomplish with the 3 dogs. So really proud of them, and I'd be happy to do a longer presentation maybe another time and answer more questions at that point, but I think good overview.
Awesome
Okay.
overview.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
And that wraps up our report. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Mahalik. Thank you, Branch. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Jankowski.
I do think it would be worthwhile for Mr. Mahalik to give a more in-depth presentation, just to hear about, what's the rotation with the dogs and how often they're in the schools and how the schools are selected. I agree. I think it's been a huge success, and I'm really glad that he presented that to us initially 3 years ago. So I think it's just important to get that out there more and let the public hear more about the benefits and how this program is working and having the success.
It was our intention to bring back Mario and Tokyo as well.
That was
We
my
sort of
other
thought
comment.
again about
Yeah.
probably not having all 3 at the same meeting. So I appreciate the, the ideas that you just shared in terms of some of the other details you might be interested in as we bring, brief presentations, maybe at 2 future meetings at some point. We can start to layer in some of those additional details, and you'll get a chance to see Mario in Tokyo as well.
Maybe every other month, we can, a 5-minute presentation as an excuse to bring one of the dogs.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments from the board? All right, well, thank you again for the report. Thank you again for the special vid. Next item on the agenda is on the budget. Tonight will be the first of multiple presentations. We'll be looking at the 24-25 budget. This is something that, as a board member, I quote, look forward to because the administration does a very nice job of outlaying information and piecewise and make it understandable for members of the board, members of the public to understand what goes in the budget. So tonight's installment, if you will, is a first look, and I'll let Dr. Campbell introduce.
All right, I will kick things off for us, and as Dr. Levinson highlighted, we're officially beginning the budget process, although I will reference in some cases, we had our initial beginning back in November. But one of the really important responsibilities of the school board is to approve an annual budget that supports the short and long-term needs of the organization. And so our administration very much is dedicated to providing the board with a very systematic and methodical overview of each component of the budget over the course of the spring. Again, you can see it started technically in November. This evening, Mr. Saul and I are beginning that process with the board and the community. We always emphasize that tonight is really a first glance. And so as we work through the budget process over the next several months, it's important to understand that some of the financial assumptions that you might see tonight will become more focused as we progress through the budget process. And again, for example, tonight, some of those revenues will become more clear to us as we work throughout the spring. The other point that I want to make about our budget process in East Penn is that we really strive to be transparent, open, and honest in our communication with the board, with the public. And it's also a very collaborative process, meaning between administration and the board, and also between administration, those of us who are here this evening, and our colleagues in buildings, in that the budget that we're bringing forward to you this spring really represents the student and organizational needs that are articulated in our comprehensive plan. And we do include input from all of our district and building leaders. So again, as you see on the screen, this is the timeline that provides structure to how we will methodically break down the budget for you. It began in November when the board adopted a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index. This evening, we will begin by taking a look at budget revenues. We'll take a close look at fund balance, and then Mr. Saul will really go into those three main revenue sources, including federal, state, and local revenues. In future meetings, you can see that we have ongoing time and discussion to take a more in-depth look at expenditures, our long-range capital and fiscal plan. We will then also provide you with the new proposed budget priorities that we foresee in terms of meeting needs of the organization in the future. And then finally, the budget process concludes about 4 months from now, ultimately when the board will adopt a final budget, which is planned for that June 10th meeting. As we often do, there is a general philosophical approach that we follow when we're working through the budget. You can see there that our goal continues consistent. Hopefully this language, I should say this philosophy, resonates with you from previous years. It's really about providing high quality, equitable educational opportunities for all of our students, while also sustaining financial health of the organization. And then specifically, you can see we have objectives which guide our process, including preserving the high quality programs that we currently have to serve students in the organization. We're also committed to continuing to offer a tiered system of supports to address the academic, the behavioral, the emotional needs of all of our students. We will also sustain funding for capital improvements, which has always been important, perhaps now more than ever as we think about the facilities process in which we are involved, as well as sustaining significant infrastructure needs such as those in our technology. We're also this year going to begin to systematically phase in staffing needs that have been identified to support the grade realignment model, again, which has some facility needs attached to that. And then finally, we will, throughout the budget process, really as we approach the final budget, also be mindful about the fact that the monies that had previously been set aside that were originally allocated to the district through ESSER grants, they will be ending next year, 24-25. And so a very thoughtful question that the board might have would be, which of those positions might we be able to sustain for next year and or beyond? So that's also one of our objectives that we'll address throughout the process. So again, wanted to give you the roadmap in terms of where we've been, where we're going, really set the stage for tonight. Tonight is informational. There is no vote. The vote doesn't come until June, so we certainly have time to work through this process together. And at this point, Mr. Saul's going to dive into the revenues.
Great, thank you. Actually, we'll start with fund balance, and we'll use fund balance as our starting point, and then we'll springboard to revenues in just a few slides. What I'd like to do, and we typically look at some slides like this, where I'd like to go back actually and start with a budget that we have the full year available to look at. So if we go back to 22-23, we actually started that budget process in October of 2021, and it went through June of 2022. But in June of 2022, the board approved the budget, and you can see that in the first column there. So in June of 22, that's the budget that was adopted. And I just want to go down through that quickly to sort of establish what we're looking at as we look at these slides. You can see the total revenue that was anticipated, the total expenditures, which included a budgetary reserve line item. That line item is for unanticipated expenditures. Typically, that is not spent, so we actually back that out to come up with an anticipated expenditure total. We then compare our total revenues to our anticipated expenditures, and we come up with a surplus or deficit. In this case, in 22-23, that deficit is related to the expenditure of those funds that we set aside. We actually carry those funds in our fund balance and spend them via a deficit budget. So we planned on spending those set-aside funds. So you can see with a beginning fund balance of $23.2 million and then a spend down of $2.6 million, we would have been left with $20.5 million. So again, I just wanted to go through the first column in some detail, but we'll just touch on the rest. Then in May of 2023, so what was that, 6 months, 7, 8, 9 months ago, we estimated at that point sort of where we would end the year. And at that point, we anticipated we would end the year with a surplus of $2 million. And then when we actually ended the year and went through our audit, end of year audit, the actual confirmed number was the confirmed number in terms of surplus or deficit is 2.3 million, but the actual audited ending fund balance was 25.8 million. That number is important because we now carry that total forward to the current year budget, which is the 23-24 budget. Again, this budget was approved in June of 23, and now we're starting to establish our estimates, which we'll finalize in May in terms of where we're going to end the current year. At this point, the only estimate that has been updated is the beginning fund balance, which was the audited ending fund balance from the previous slide. So you can see beside the green arrow, we carry that forward, and then that allows us to update our estimated ending fund balance for the current fiscal year. What that then does is allow us to carry that forward to establish that as the starting point in terms of fund balance for the 24-25 budget. So this really establishes, again, that starting point. The other thing I wanted to do in terms of fund balance is we always talk about the fund balance and the total fund balance. Our audited financial statements include a breakdown of what's included in that. We never really have talked about it during the budget process. So I wanted to actually share that information with the board because we see that number, 23 million, and think, well, that's a lot of money that's just sitting there in surplus. But I think when you look at the breakdown, all of a sudden you start to say, oh, okay, most of that has purpose. So I've included for you for future reference the definitions of the various components of fund balance. And this is the breakdown of the fund balance for the at June 30th, 2023. Again, the most recent audited financial statements. First, the non-spendable fund balance represents a little bit of textbook definition here. Funds that cannot be spent because they're either not in a spendable form or legally or contractually need to remain intact. So what does that mean? This example, you can see these were prepaid expenses. So it's not money you have available to spend because it actually the cash has already gone out the door, but we have to reflect the fact that actually will be shown as an expenditure in the future year. The other part of that non-spendable was principal that needs to remain intact. So it would be like the principal of a trust fund, as an example, where the trust fund is set up that you only spend the interest. So the principal would be a non-spendable fund balance. A restricted fund balance are funds that are restricted for a specific purpose. Usually they're donations, grants, memorial awards, and they're either restricted legally or restricted through the donor when they give the money to, in this case, the district. So as an example, the memorial funds, when those funds were donated to the district, there was a specific purpose and specific rate parameters that were set up around those. And so we have to use those for that purpose. Therefore, those are restricted. The committed fund balance represents, again, little textbook definition, funds that can only be used for specific purposes as a result of formal action of the school board. So you may recall over the last couple of years, the board has adopted a resolution at the time that the budget was approved to set aside the funds, those offset funds that we've been using to mitigate the learning loss effects of COVID-19. So those have been committed by the board for a specific purpose, and that purpose can only change by action of the board. Assigned funds can be assigned by basically an employee of the district who's authorized to do that. That would be myself or the superintendent. In this case, the assigned funds are the subsequent year's budget deficit. So in this case, if you think back, you say, well, the deficit was only roughly 2 million as we looked at those. From an accounting standpoint, what you have to look at is the full deficit between the projected revenues and the projected expenditures, including that budgetary reserve line item. So in this case, that projected amount would be $11 million. And then finally, the unassigned fund balances are those which do not have a specific purpose. And that are not categorized as restricted, committed, and I think that makes sense. They're not categorized as the other categories. We do have a small portion of the unassigned that we have labeled as allocated to school buildings. What that is we track for school buildings monies that they receive, for instance, for donations from a supermarket, monies that they get from the special photo days, funds that are given to the building, and we try to track them for them so that they have those available from year to year. But working with our auditors, we decided it was best to just carve that out as a piece of that unassigned fund balance. So in total, you can see that the June 30th, 2023 fund balance of $25 million is broken down into all of these various components. So it's not like all of that is just unrestricted cash that's available to the district. It has all of these specific purposes. So hopefully that makes sense and gives a little more clarity as to what the components of the fund balance are, and hopefully also helps with that ongoing question of how much fund balance is enough fund balance. Here you can, again, seeing the breakdown, I think, helps answer that question. So with that, I'd like to move into an overview of the revenues. We'll touch on, as Dr. Campbell said, the three primary revenue sources: local, state, and federal. And then at the end, we'll see the makeup of how much we get from each of those sources. Again, some definitions that are available for you to reference in the future. And I'd just like to go down through these. I won't necessarily hit on every single one, but the ones where we see larger changes are the ones that have, larger impact overall in the budget. The first one, and probably the most significant, is the current real estate taxes. As you know, these taxes are assessed and levied upon real property or real estate in the district, as well as any land, which includes land and any land improvements or buildings on the land. Current real estate taxes are presently showing, as you can see, a total year-over-year increase of 6.91%, and that's made up really of two components. In order to understand what makes that up, I'd like to just move to the next slide briefly and sort of give you an overview of the actual calculation of how real estate tax revenue is calculated. The three primary components are the first thing you see there, the assessed value of the real estate in the district, as well as the millage rate, which is set by the board, and collection percentage. So we'll talk about those as we go down through this. The first factor, which is the assessed value, as you're probably aware, if you're a property owner, the Lehigh County Office of Assessment, assesses the properties and assigns value to those. We take that collectively, and you can see that the collective value in East Penn School District is $5.8 billion. That is then multiplied by the millage rate. When we talk about millage rate and Act 1, this is the rate which we refer to in Act 1 in terms of a percentage increase. So you can see presently this reflects a 5.94% increase. As you may recall from when the Act 1 Act 1 resolution was approved, our maximum index for this year is 6.2%. So we multiply those together and get our preliminary tax levy. The state gives to school districts to distribute to taxpayers from the state gaming fund the property tax reduction allocation. So that's the homestead, farmstead reduction that is on the real estate tax bill. Essentially what happens is we reduce this from a real estate tax line item, but we have a state revenue line item that offsets this item. So we subtract that from our preliminary tax levy to get our revised tax levy, multiply that by our collection percentage, which is the amount that we anticipate to receive in total real estate taxes for the year. The reason that the collection percentage isn't 100, there's actually a number of things. We offer a 2% discount for paying early, so that can affect the total collection. We have land in our district that is preserved farmland that has a frozen millage. It was frozen at the time that that was put into farmland preservation, so that will reduce the total collection. We have a property tax rebate program, so when rebates are given, that reduces the total collection. Also, we have a Hamilton Crossings is a tax increment financing area, and so there's some of the taxes from that actually go back in to pay some of the debt service for when that was originally developed. And then finally, at the end of the year, there are unpaid real estate taxes. So all of these contribute to the tax collection percentage. We've been tracking this percentage since 2006, and interestingly, the collection percentage really hovers right around that 96.2 mark. There was 1 year in that 2006, 17-year period, where it actually bumped up to 98%, but otherwise it is very consistently in that 96.2% range. On the next slide, we can see the total the total millage rate increase each year for the last 10 years, which I think there's 11 on here because it includes the projected year, as well as the actual Act 1 index that was permitted in that year. I just want to point out in 2014-15 and 2015-16, you'll see that the actual increase exceeded the Act 1 index. That was permissible through Act 1 exceptions, which for all intents and purposes are no longer available to us. As you can see, including the 5.95% increase that's in this very early budget, the 5-year average tax increase is just a little over 3%, and the 10-year average is just a little over 2.5%. Okay, I'll touch on the rest of the revenue items. Interim real estate taxes, and I'll refresh your memory of what these are. Interim real estate taxes are taxes on new construction that didn't appear on the original duplicate or on the original tax bills when they were sent out. So it happens in between the regular tax billings, hence the interim. This really revolves around new development or additions to existing dwellings. And so it can be difficult to predict because it can change from year to year. So what we do is we look back and try to average, we eyeball what it's been over the last few years, but essentially just try to average the past few years if they all have been somewhat consistent. So that's what we've done with the interim real estate taxes, is average that. The public utility realty tax is payments from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that offset the tax-exempt properties owned by public utilities. As an example, properties owned by PPL or Buckeye Partners, we don't receive taxes directly from them. They pay into a state fund, and then we receive funds through the PERTA, as we refer to it, or the Public Utility Realty Tax Act. Those revenues are, because of the way the allocation methodology works, tend to be very consistent from year to year. Again, there's a small adjustment here, which is related to just trying to average out the last 5 years to come up with an average number for that. The next item I'd like to touch on is the current earned income taxes. Earned income taxes are taxes levied upon wages, salaries, commissions, net profits, et cetera. It's that time of year we're all filing our federal, state, and local taxes. This is the local taxes, the local wage tax. When we look at what we budgeted for the current year, it appears that our collections are outpacing the current year budget. And so what we've done is we've applied where we believe that the current year is going to end and applied a 3% increase on top of that for next year. We also received some projections from the tax collector, Berkheimer, that we use for this. We're really close to their range, but we're budgeting very much at the high end of the range that they gave us in terms of their anticipated collections. The next item is real estate transfer taxes. Again, this is an assessment on the transfer price of real estate. So when somebody sells a piece of property, there's a tax that is collected on that exchange transaction, and the district receives a portion of that. Again, it can be a little hard to predict because it really has to do with the number of sales that occur in a given year. If you have a number of large commercial properties that are sold and change hands, there can be a significant impact. If you don't have that in a given year, certainly the overall amount would go down in that year. So again, what we try to do is look at this and average it out. If there's any outliers, we try to pull them out because again, it could have been one or two warehouses that were sold that's sort of throwing that number off. Delinquent real estate taxes really sort of is related back to when we were talking about the current real estate taxes. It's those taxes that at the end of the collection year, on December 31st, haven't been paid. The tax collectors turn those over to a delinquent tax collector to collect those. Again, believe it or not, that you actually see more consistency in this than you may think. What I've learned over my career is people who pay their taxes routinely pay their taxes, and people who don't pay their taxes routinely don't pay their taxes. And so you see sort of incremental growth over time simply because your millage rate is going up, so your overall tax base is going up, but there is a fair amount of consistency in terms of and predictability in that number. Probably currently the most volatile or the most difficult to predict is in earnings on interest, because we went from an interest rate environment where we were earning $20,000 a year to an interest rate environment where we're earning $2 million a year. And you know, the $2 million question is, when does that interest rate environment change and start to come down a little bit? And so if you consider going from a 0% interest rate environment to 5%, that's $2 million. So if it even comes down 4% or 3%, there's a fairly significant impact on that. So we've been a little more aggressive in terms of next year than we were for the current year. I would say it's still somewhat conservative, though, overall in terms of if it were the current interest rate environment. This is probably one of the key items that we'll keep our eye on as we progress through the budget process and as we get closer to the end of the budget process, and maybe continue to watch those economic reports to see what the outlook is for the next year in terms of what an appropriate budget number is for interest on investments. The next item is the IDEA, or Individuals, I want to make sure I get this right, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So these are federal monies that we receive through our local intermediate unit, and the intermediate unit acts as an agent for the federal government. Typically, we find out in October of the current year what our allocation is. So what we do is we're actually budgeting based on our current year allocation. So if you look at 23-24, that would have been the 22-23 allocation, and the 24-25, we've used the current year 23-24 allocation. Again, it's relatively hard to predict. It doesn't often go down, but there have been times where that number has actually gone down. So it's not like we can just apply 2 or 3% multiplier and feel comfortable with that number. And finally, there was one I didn't have in my notes. I just wanted to touch on revenue from local governments. You can see an increase there. This is really related to our crossing guard program. As you'll recall, we were partnered with Lower Macungie Township, and we had participation with them for the crossing guard program. Looking forward to next year, we're budgeting for the new partnership with Emmaus Borough. So you see an increase in that line item. The other items, tuition from patrons, miscellaneous income. Again, they're just adjustments based on what we're seeing occur. Nothing really specific. Again, it's sort of bringing together a host of different items in those areas to get those numbers. Next, we'll take a look at the state revenue. The first item, and probably the biggest item in terms of state revenue, is the basic education funding. And I want to make sure I get these numbers correct. So last year, when we were preparing the budget for 23-24, we included an estimated 8.7% increase for basic education subsidy. When the Commonwealth passed their budget in July, they enacted an appropriation that included, they enacted the budget that included an appropriation for East Penn, which was 9.6%. So we budgeted an 8.7% increase. There was actually a 9.6% increase, which equated to $133 million. No, sorry, 133,000. I wrote million, but that's not correct. $133,000 more than we had anticipated. Let me continue with the next piece. And then for 24-25, what we've done is we've increased the subsidy amount 3%. It's hard, you can't really see it directly here because you have to remember, what we budgeted was based off a different base than what we're budgeting this year. Or the base was, for this year, was the actual subsidy for last year. The base for last year was the actual subsidy for the previous year. So last Tuesday, the Pennsylvania governor delivered his budget proposal for the Commonwealth for 24-25. In his budget, he's included increases for education that include a line item increase for East Penn School District of 11.7. I can't quite see that. 11.7 something percent.
7.3.
And then we will get in a few minutes to the special education piece as well, but you can see that here. I think the big question would be, okay, administration, he proposed an 11.7% increase. You've put in a 3% increase. That's quite a difference. Why didn't you use the 11% increase? So I went out on the internet and did a search of governor's budget and came up with a handful of websites and headlines. And you can see there's both very positive, supportive statements, and you can also see statements that don't necessarily support the governor's budget. And at this point, we're less than a week from when that was approved. There's a lot of what I'll call Harrisburg politics that need to occur. Over the past few years, the General Assembly and governor have been very favorable towards public education. May that number end up higher than 3%? I think it may, but I really think it's too early in the process to assign a value to that. And this is sort of what we did last year, is we continued to talk to our legislators and listen. We talked to both sides of the aisle, both parties, and sort of came up with what we felt comfortable with. And that's what we will continue, that's what we will do this year as well. But again, I just feel it's too early in the process to assign a larger number until we have sort of the flavor of the whole General Assembly and where we see them going in terms of education policy. So as Dr. Campbell said earlier in her introduction, this is a process. And just because you see a number here this evening doesn't mean this is the same number we're going to see a month from now, or certainly not necessarily the same number we're going to see in June when we adopt the final budget. But again, because there was such a disparity between those, I wanted to talk a little bit about why that exists at this point. Then the next line item is also falls under the basic education funding. It's Social Security. It's actually reimbursement for some of the wage taxes that we pay. We receive 50% reimbursement on the Social Security and Medicare that we pay into the federal government for our employees. In terms of special education funding, again, this is very similar to, well, the concept is very similar to what I described with the basic education funding. However, slightly different. When we budgeted in June, when we budgeted the 23-24 budget, we estimated a 9.3% increase. The actual increase was 5.9%. So you can see it went the other way there. And the increase was actually $140,000 less than we had budgeted. So if you think about the basic education subsidy, that was $133,000 more, and the special education subsidy, $140,000 less. The net was $7,000 less, which wasn't overly significant in terms of our overall budget. But I think, again, that piece sort of demonstrates when all indicators indicated there was going to be more money put into the special education subsidy line item, but at the end of the day, that actually didn't happen. Okay, the pupil transportation subsidy is reimbursement on our actual pupil transportation cost. The decrease in this is during the pandemic, because of we had days we didn't transport students, we had a number of changes to our transportation. Our subsidy went down, and we anticipated it was going to rebound maybe at a faster pace or to a greater extent than it has. And so this adjustment is really to sort of reset back to what we're actually seeing happen as opposed to what we anticipated would happen. We actually, we're going to dig into this more. I've contacted a consultant who actually looks at all of the information that we provide to the state to get our subsidy, who's going to help us pull that apart and say, okay, what's really happening here? And are the correct things happening? Because I think it's important to ask when you're looking at nearly $500,000 difference between what we think we should see and what we're actually getting from the state. Rental and sinking fund reimbursement is reimbursement on our debt service payments. Our overall debt service will be going down next year, and so our reimbursement will be going down. Just a real quick aside, as we are looking forward at the possible projects in the future, you've heard about the PlanCon program, and the PlanCon program no longer exists. The PlanCon program is what provided these subsidy reimbursements. So at this point, any future borrowing we do or debt incurrence, we likely will not have reimbursement from the state. So this number will continue to go down as we move into the future. The property tax reduction allocation we talked about earlier, that's that money that goes directly to the taxpayers through the and my mind went blank. The
Tax relief.
yes, the tax relief on the tax bills. Thank you. The school safety and security grants, those grants actually are ending in the current year. Where there's a new round of grants in the current year that will extend into next year. So we actually will likely plug in some additional security grants that we will have for next year. We're currently working on those internally and didn't feel comfortable plugging those in at this point. No change in Ready to Learn block grant. And the retirement reimbursement, similar to the Social Security reimbursement, we receive 50% on the retirement contributions to the retirement fund. And the final piece, this will be very quick, is federal. This includes all of the titles, Title I, II, III, and 4 that fall under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Presently, all of those are based on our current allocations. Sometimes we receive allocation indications in the spring. At that time, we would certainly update those numbers. The medical access reimbursement is funds that we receive through Medicaid. Those funds are held by the state in basically in an account for the school district, and we're able to pull those funds out for appropriate reasons. We fund 5 special education positions with that funding, and so the increase here is really just the increased cost over 5 special education positions. And that just brings us then to our overall pie chart that shows you that, we rely, 75% of our revenue is local, 24% of it comes from the state, and 1% comes from the federal government. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Saul, for a very detailed presentation on the revenue side of things. I'll now open up to questions from the board. Mr. Jankowski.
First of all, thank you very much. You've kicked off this budget season with yet another, I think it gets better every year. So thank you for your level of explanation and the information you're providing us. Couple of questions regarding some of the funding sources. So with respect to the local, when does the TIF end for the Hamilton Crossing such that we'll start receiving our full allocation of the property tax?
I'm going to say somewhere in the area of 2034.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that that's precisely accurate. It's going to be close.
Okay.
It's farther in the future than everybody wants it to be.
And then with respect to the Act 1 index and the millage rate, just so we're clear for the public and everyone's awareness, we start out at the Act 1 index level. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to increase taxes by that rate, but from a budgeting perspective, we have to start somewhere. So we start there, and then hopefully through the process, as we do every year, we whittle that down. And I assume that was the same rationale this year.
Absolutely. And actually, we are below the index at this point.
Or-
Not a whole
yeah.
lot, but we are
Right.
below. And what I would say is, all things remaining the same, so if nothing else changed except for some of the revenue assumptions that we talked about, the fact that we would receive additional revenue from the state or additional revenue from other sources, by default would reduce that tax number as well. So everything you said is absolutely correct.
So now I'm going to ask you a question that you can't answer, and ask you to get your crystal ball out. So as I think most people are aware, the Supreme Court decision with respect to the state's lack of funding for public schools, and if, obviously politics always plays a part in this. Are we getting any insight from the Department of Education or otherwise when we think we might see something of any increase in funding? Or, I assume we're years away from that, but you never know how these budget sessions go. Obviously you can't put any of that into any of your budgeting each year because it's a great unknown. But is there we getting any information from the department as to what we're seeing or what's happening in Harrisburg around that?
A couple things with regard to that. The court decision did not indicate all remedies needed to be monetary. They suggested there could be other forms, other remedies could come in other forms. I don't know what that means. Most people don't know what that means. So I think that's the first thing is it may not be a windfall in dollars at the end of the day. The other thing is, what I would say is, having listened to the governor's budget, I would say that the court decision was, may I say, the backstop for his education funding component. And there certainly is a lot of discussion about the decision. But it's really just that. It's discussion about, well, we need to do something, and we'll do things incrementally. But again, what I just said sort of represents the position of one person in Harrisburg.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of other people that contribute to the final decision-making. So I guess they're my comments.
No,
You're right, I can't
that's-
answer the question.
No, I thought you would be able to, but no, I'm joking. That's I appreciate your insight. That's all I have. I look forward to the coming presentations. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jankowski. Ms. Bowman?
Yes, I think I'm not questioning the budgeting, the conservative budgeting of 3% for the state, but I am curious. What's the difference in actual dollars between the 3% and the 11%? Like if we actually got the 11%, how much would that change the budget in dollars?
It would increase, we've budgeted 18.7 million, and it would go to 18.8 million.
So not all that much. It sounds like such a big increase, but the state hardly funds us at all, so, okay, that makes sense now. Other question is just something I'm just curious to understand. How do you budget in new commercial? For example, if that Top Golf development, I'm not sure if that's East Penn or Parkland, but things like that, like when do you put those anticipated revenues into your budget?
We put those in at the time that they are occupied. So when they are occupied, the county assessment office goes out and then assigns the assessment, adds it to the tax rolls. If it's in between a taxing cycle, which 100% of the time it is, because otherwise it would have to be July 1st, we would issue an interim, and then those numbers would actually be included with the monthly reports we get from the county assessment office that we use as the basis for our calculations.
Okay. And I'm assuming based on what you just went through here that there aren't any significant commercial projects coming on, well, how should I word this? Assumed to be coming online soon that would affect the budget in a big way?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Mr. Kelly?
Thanks
Sure.
for the presentations. As I look at the predictability of everything that's going on, is the timing right for us as money's coming in and money's coming out to pay all our bills on time each month? Like, is that, when you have like the revenues and the cash flows coming in, are we able to meet those bills as they're going out?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That's a great question. Given the structure for East Penn School District, we rely heavily on school real estate taxes. If you think about that cycle, you're offered a 2% discount to pay in July and August. Then you can pay at face in September and October, and then there's a penalty added in November and December, and then greater penalties if you go beyond that, which encourages people to pay very early in our fiscal year. So we actually get a majority of our funds early in the fiscal year. Different from maybe an urban or suburban school district that relies more on state subsidies. And so their money is coming when the state gives it to them. And we're not in that situation. So we actually have the opportunity to take those funds that we receive very early in the year. We do a cash flow analysis for the entire year, and then we invest those funds, which is how we end up with a very nice investment income. Because we time our investments, we make sure we have what we will need when we need it. But to answer your question, yes. A second part to that question is, at the end of our fiscal year, our teaching staff has the option to take a lump sum payment for the summertime. And so we experience things like that. And that's where our fund balance that we have helps us sort of bridge the summertime, that period from when we have to pay out salaries and benefits and a variety of things, and the time when those taxes start coming in practically in August. Some people pay in July. Most people wait, sort of that third week of August is the sweet spot for paying the real estate taxes.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any further comments or questions? Dr. Whitney?
Yeah, you covered it a little bit, but it was a little while ago. So looking at the largest line item here, the real estate tax collection, current real estate taxes, can you just explain a little more about the justification for the predicted almost 7% increase? It's a pretty significant jump. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Actually, that's really related to the expenditures. And so we'll be talking about the expenditures at the next meeting. And so I think you would have a better feel for what's driving that increase when we talk about the expenditures, more than trying to explain it in terms of a revenue fee function.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Bowman?
I missed one, and it's more appropriate for the next meeting, but that increase, do you know what it comes to for the average median valued house in our district per year?
I don't have that calculation with me, but certainly I can have it, as
Next
well
time.
as when we get to the long-range plan, that is a piece that is embedded in our long-range
Right.
plan. So I certainly can provide it earlier, but I know that the board will get it eventually as well.
Process, okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Yes.
I have I guess, an observation, and I just wanted to see if you can provide me with some insight. So part of what helps drive the ability to raise revenue from property taxes is the amount of assessed value that we have in our municipalities. So, Lower Macungie Township, Upper Milford Township, Albertus, Macungie, Emmaus, the boroughs are a little more landlocked in terms of the ability to develop, and the townships are being very conservative in the way that they approve things. So, the ability to create added value and deriving revenue from an increased tax base is somewhat limited by the smart growth strategies and the landlocked aspects that we have in our municipalities. Particularly if we can compare it to some of our neighbors that seem to approve most anything that comes their way. Are you seeing a slowdown in terms of eventually we're going to reach a point where natural or organic growth in that number is going to diminish?
Excuse me. Yes, I would say we're seeing a slowdown. I believe that when we looked at the assessment, actually, I'll just bring it up on here. When you look at the assessed value growth of sub 1%, so it's 0.8%. I would say that's lower than what we have seen. I would say over the last 10 years. I don't want to characterize in the last year or two, but we as the warehouses were being built in Congdon Hill Circle and out near Albertus, certainly we experienced some significant assessed value growth at that time. We're certainly seeing a slowing of that definitely warehouse, but also the commercial industrial. And so, yes, I would say yes, we're seeing a slowing of that growth. We're seeing some residential development, but that tends to add to the tax base in a bit more of a slower and more methodical way than adding, a new, 100,000 square foot warehouse.
Right. Okay. All right. I just think that, it's not going to be next year, but, I think it's something that might factor into some of those projections that we do in the spreadsheet the magic spreadsheet, as we will call it, that comes in where we look at the next 10 years. So again, something to keep in the back of our mind in terms of what we're going to be able to do with real estate taxes. And in my opinion, should create some pressure from what the state can help with bringing in revenues for the school district. So again, I retain some sense of cautious optimism that they're going to make good on what they're trying to do and what Shapiro's proposal has been. But like you're saying, for now, being conservative, I think is probably the smart thing to do. But maintaining communication with our local representatives is probably be a good way to get a handle on what's actually going to happen. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Again, thank you, Mr. Saul.
Okay.
We'll look
Thank you.
forward to what do we call it, part two.
Yes.
Okay,
More to come.
more to come. Okay. All right, next item on the agenda is under personnel. We're going to look first at the personnel items under item A. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the board? All right, seeing none, Ms. Allen, will please call the roll?
Mr. Pelleggi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Dr. Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Moving on to item B under personnel. We're going to have a presentation on middle-level safety and security personnel. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
I would. Do you
sorry.
mind if I just very briefly honor some of our
Apologies,
retirees?
I just remembered.
That will, Michael Billman, you don't have to worry, I'll talk, and that gives us transition time, but thank you. I did want to just briefly go back to the board just accepted the retirement of 4 employees who really have have made significant positive contributions to our East Penn community. Those individuals include Donna Smith, who's has 37 years of experience as an administrative assistant in East Penn. Since 1990 in particular, she's been in our counseling office at Lower Macungie Middle School and has really been a staple there, I would say, in terms of the support that she offers to our teachers, our counselors, and our students. Also, this evening, the board accepted the retirement of Delvin Whalen, who is a member of our maintenance team. He has almost 37 years of experience with the school district. He's, in particular, since 2011, he's been the head custodian at Macungie Elementary and certainly will be missed greatly by the staff as well as the students. Mark Dobbs is retiring at the end of the year. He'll have a total of 33 years in education, the majority of which, 31 of which have been in East Penn. Mark has been a teacher at the elementary as well as the middle level, and he's been a school counselor at both the elementary and middle level. So we certainly will miss his work in supporting our students. And finally, Deneen McGlone retires at the end of this year and will have, again, 31 years total in education, 18 of which have been in East Penn. She came to us with experience from out of state and has all of her experience in East Penn here has been at Shoemaker Elementary as a 4th grade teacher and has one of those individuals who's often served on curriculum committees and things like that. And we certainly will miss her as well. So I wanted to just very briefly celebrate and recognize the contributions of those 4 amazing team members. And now I will transition into another information piece that we'd like to bring forth to the board. Quick reminder before several team members come up to walk through the brief presentation, but as part of the 23-24 budget process, so the current budget cycle that we're in right now, the board approved approximately $400,000 for school safety personnel for the middle level. That was presented as part of a public presentation last spring. And throughout the summer, as well as early fall, members of our district administration engaged in discussions with our local law enforcement partners to investigate the possibility of adding a school resource officer at each of our middle schools. Due to low numbers in recruitment for law enforcement positions at both the state and the local levels, we're not able to pursue school resource officers for the middle level at this time. That certainly will continue to be a future priority for us. And we will continue to consult with our law enforcement partners so that we can make a determination as to when that might be feasible. And again, that would be something that obviously would come forth to the board. However, we do remain committed and see value to having personnel who support the safety and security of our students and staff, and we've pursued other positions. And so this evening, we have members of our team who are going to provide an overview of school security officers. These individuals are unarmed officers or security personnel in our district. They are considered district employees. I want to clarify the positions that we're proposing are not SROs and they are not police officers. In tonight's presentation, you're going to hear more about the vision for the position. We have members of our building team here as well to sort of talk you through from a building leader's perspective how they envision those positions supporting students and staff in the building. And I'll just remind the board that the purpose of tonight is informational. So we're not asking you to make any decisions tonight. Interested in your feedback on the positions, and then certainly would bring back the positions at a future meeting potentially for board action. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to members of our district team.
All right, good evening. So as you see up here with me, Dr. Marabella will be joining us in a second here. Mr. Roof, one of our middle school principals, and Mrs. Yencha, the other middle school principal, will be helping to communicate what Dr. Campbell introduced as our school safety or school security officers. As she indicated, we're talking about unarmed security officers here. The purpose and the why in this presentation. It really starts with there is nothing that's more important than the safety of our students and our staff members and our buildings and the security of our buildings. And so, of course, as we indicated, we had a lot of conversations about SROs and adding SROs, and really kind of are now at this point where we're talking about security officers. I was fortunate enough to talk with some school security experts in the field, as well as many other administrators who've worked with security officers currently or in the past, and really have heard a lot of great feedback about the fact of what the security officers do, which you'll hear tonight, above and beyond what other staff members we currently have in place will do. We currently do not have anyone that does any of the security roles that will be communicated tonight specifically by our middle school principals, which is outlined in this presentation. The where and when, our plan, our hope is to add one security officer in each middle school. The timeline would be after recruitment, interviews, training, and transition into this position. The hope would be at some point during this spring. Experience, you'll hear a little bit more about training from Dr. Marabella, but it's most important that our officers contribute to the development and maintenance of a safe and caring environment where students feel respected, accepted, and safe. We think that that's what's most important. We would love candidates that have either retired SROs, have experience with students, or experience in law enforcement, but clearly creating a culture where students feel safe and respected is a critical component. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the why, a little bit of the work that we've done with security officers, where and when, and then kind of what we're looking for as a quick overview. So at this point, I'll turn it to Dr. Marabella.
Thank you. Good evening. Regarding the trainings for the security school personnel would be, they would go through the school resource officer training program. that is about a week of training. And I've gone through the course in the past as well. And part of that is there are 17 components that are outlined in Act 67, which requires through PCCD, which requires 17 specific areas of training. I'm not going to read them all, but some of the highlights of some of the training that they would receive through Act 67, as would be required, would be the security, school roles and responsibilities of the security officer, ethics of being a security officer, the role of a model and a mentor in being a security officer, the developmental stages of students K through 12, trauma-informed education, school law, developing cultural awareness and diversity, risk vulnerability identification and mitigation, and then there's some practicum case studies. That's some of the 17 key components that are covered during that week's worth of training. In addition to that, we would be layering on first aid, CPR, and AED, which we could train in-house. We have in-house trainers for that. We would also be layering on district de-escalation training. So it would be a step beyond the minimal de-escalation training that they would be offered through the SRO program. We would be adding our own. We have 2 trainers in the district that are trained in CPI, and these individuals would be going through and being certified in Crisis Prevention Institute de-escalation training. And then we would have some training for specific special education populations. And there's also a component in the SRO training for working with students with special needs as well. So it's a pretty robust training program. It's not that we would just be plucking these people and saying, good luck as you pilot the way through it. We'd be preparing them with some very specific roles and responsibilities and understanding, but some very specific training that would that they could hit the ground running and know what it's like to work with students within a school environment. I'll pass it over to Mrs. Yensho.
Thank you. Good evening. As we began examining the potential roles of a school security officer at our middle level buildings, we came up with an overview of ideas that we believe to be essential at this time, but of course not fully comprehensive. One of the first and most important is, of course, to maintain a safe and orderly environment by maintaining a visible presence. Some of the areas that Mr. Roof and I discussed at length are our bus lots in the morning and the afternoon, up to 1,100 kids coming out of cars and out of buses. They're middle schoolers. Sometimes they're not paying attention. Dismissal is a very busy time. We have kids running out of the building last minute, and extra hands to help with the safety and security is, of course, of utmost importance. Oftentimes we have parents relay concerns overnight about things that did happen on the buses, and we want to make sure we're out there in the morning to catch those things before they even enter during the day. So we thought that they would be able to help with that presence as well. Parent drop-off and pickup is another area where we can ensure that our procedures are being followed for the safety of students. Sometimes we have difficulty getting students into the building in the morning if they're coming in with challenges from the night before. And it's also a great way for our SSO to build positive relationships with our parents and community members. Of course, our hallways, up to 1,100 middle school students transitioning between periods. So being present in those busy areas of our hallways during our lunches and in our hotspot areas, oftentimes our bathrooms, our stairwells, and then specific hallways that we know to be crowded. Of course, we would like for them to create a positive school climate through all of their interactions. And how would we do that? We would not want our SSO to keep school safety, of course, at the forefront, build trust through their commitment and follow through with their actions, engage in actions that promote positive mental health with all of our students, and of course, being positive, having a strong sense of humor, and a large dose of patience with our middle school students. We want them to create a connection with students and staff to, of course, establish an environment of respect. In my mind, this is one of the most important and crucial roles, is understanding the middle school mind, knowing what middle schoolers are up against every day, academically, socially, emotionally, with regards to social media trends and relationships. Greeting students in a positive and genuine way to get to know the students and families. And of course with faculty, because the relationships are imperative to be collaborative and respectful so that the safety and security and our measures perform optimally for our entire school community. Of course, serve as a collaborative member of our school administrative team. Through these positive collaborative relationships, they have a lot to offer our core teams. Through our weekly meetings, we will have them join us to update us on students or families that they might see a need through their daily interactions, who might need more support, whether it's truancy, home visits, or possible check-in, check-out with our students. And of course, a joint emergency and crisis response with our administrative teams. We would, of course, want them to enact appropriate East Penn School District Board policies, administrative regulations, and uphold the East Penn Code of Conduct respective to their roles. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And of course, we would encourage them to make recommendations for enhancing building safety and security measures, because through their daily activities, we would want them to be collaborative with our administration regards to student safety concerns or any building concerns that they see need to be addressed. This time, I'll pass it over to Mr. Roof.
Hi, good evening. So in a very similar manner to what Mrs. Yensho shared, what does this actually look like in the day-to-day? You kind of have to look at these school buildings with 1,100 students, 100 faculty members, and the large litany of activities that are going on in the school day. This person allows us to really support student need, but also ensure that like all the other day-to-day functions of the building are happening. So when we're talking about building relationships with students through positive interactions and modeling the portrait of the graduate, like having experienced a school security person who was the person that everyone went to at my previous district, this is a powerful thing if you get the right person. And I've worked with a person in a previous district that literally 1,100 kids at my previous school would seek out the person because they were that person that greeted everyone every morning. They were the person that modeled appropriate behavior. They were really and that person was a dad figure for many students. So what does that look like? It really looks like that's part of the staffing component of this. So when Dr. Povolitis is talking about what the staffing looks like, when we're talking about building strong relationships and having positive interactions, we're the person in charge of who comes into that role, and you be very picky on who you put in that role, because it is really through those relationships that you can do more preventative action and more preventative work. We're already seeing that in a very similar way with the student advisors, but it's really building on that in a whole nother area. What actively managing and monitoring arrival dismissal, Mrs. Yensho really kind of explained that. We were talking about it before this meeting as well. It could be something as simple as you have an 11-year-old who forgot their musical instrument in the school building, and they run inside, and they don't think that as the buses are leaving the parking lot that there's not looking for a 4-foot-tall 11-year-old student running as fast as they possibly can. So ensuring that those things are there to kind of monitor, go through that process. And it's also, you look at both school buildings are both on very busy roads, and very frequently mom or dad will tell students, I'm going to pick you up at X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to listen to parent. And this is something that we deal with a lot at our school. It's pick me up across the street at the church. Well, crossing Buckeye Road in the middle of the day is extremely dangerous. And this is something that I send a pretty routine. The parents that are in the room know that I send that out really routinely. And it's not the child that's making that decision. It's largely the parent that's making that decision. So there's another person who's able to be a person to support that process and say, hey, this is where we're walking. This is where the setup is. These are these things. And that's a 180-day challenge, because it's not something that the day you think that you have it set is the day that it goes again. And those are all processes that ebb and flow with time, they ebb and flow with weather, and they can always be very different. In terms of actively monitoring hallway common spaces, lunches, Mrs. Yensho briefly touched on that, but it's really more about looking at those areas, and she used the phrase hot spots. This is something that we're all already doing, but what I can share with you is when we're doing it as building administrators, that means we're likely not monitoring instructional practices. It means we're likely not doing a lot of the things as instructional leaders that we have to do. And it's about segmenting that time. And this person will allow us to further that, and then it gets us into classrooms more, which makes sure that the instruction that's happening is more to the direction with which we want it to be. And again, that's not a punitive thing. It's really about that support. You have a building at Myers, 900 students. There's 1,100 students at LMS. These are large school buildings. These buildings are larger than many of the high schools in Lehigh Valley. So when you look at that size of students and you look at the personnel that it takes to operate these buildings, this is just one more step to put us in a position where we're preventing things before they happen. We're also making students much more comfortable, because they know when I'm walking down the hallway, everything I'm going to have that trusted adult that I can go and talk to and that person that I can rely on. And again, that all comes back into the hiring process. Responding to building incidents, emergencies, and we gave examples of vape alarms, medical emergencies, and safe school events. But really, it's about the medical emergencies and the vape alarms, and those are things that, again, are pulling staff. Those are nursing resources, those are administrative resources, to things that often could be a false alarm or they could be something else. But when you have a building so high, for example, 67,000 square feet, and while I don't look like a person that can move very fast, I pride myself in making it very quickly into a lot of those settings. But an extra person that can get there and also be that person to help support the movement of students should you need to. The support of adults in those situations. And to Dr. Marabella's point, another person who has those trainings, within the NASRO script for a school resource officer and all these other things that have those trainings that, frankly, staff members do not. And then obviously this, safe school events, like when Mrs. Yancho's having a fire drill or a school safety drill, she has to be responsible for 1,100 students and 150 adults. So having another person being able to support those things, while they are moments in time, they are routine and required. So doing them to the best of your ability, it really takes a village to do that. Participating in initial investigation in conjunction with the administration. When we're doing these investigative processes around school safety and school discipline, having additional eyes in those are really critical, because you're having those conversations. And our goal, again, in these processes is not to punish. Our goal is to gather as much information as we can have. So if you have someone who is getting in front and they're being a person who people rely on, much of that really is just relationship building and then helping to educate and move forward in that. And this is a person that likely could prevent a lot of that. And again, that's been my experience in a school setting with this type of personnel, is that's a preventative measure as much as it is something that goes through once something bad has happened. The other piece there is you obviously need someone in a lot of these situations to be an assist in these. And it's one of these things where each of us feel very, very guilty in times when we can't be in a place, because then that leaves my coworkers and Mrs. Yancho's coworkers in a place where they don't have that person. So this allows for that duplicity. Actively monitoring large groups of students. I mean, this is a common problem and a common challenge in almost all schools. And again, this is a staff member that we don't currently have, but it also would be able to provide that support, whether it's in a lunchroom, whether it's in a recess setting, whether it's in any of these areas. And these are just very important safety times when having as many people available. You can see in the job description that we really put a lot of conversation, a lot of thought into what we want, because again, the job description guides the hiring process, and it's really critical that you find the right fit and the right person, and it's not just like a race to get a body, if that makes sense.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you for that presentation. And I'll open questions for the board. Dr. Whitney?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple questions. One around how this person would interact with the restorative practices that are part of district, I'll say discipline, or disciplinary cases. Would this person have a role in those restorative practice settings? Would they be expected to take an active role in, say, a restorative practice conversation or circle? And again, I'm not fully versed on exactly what restorative practices are being employed at this point, but I guess my general question is, how would this person, or would this person be expected to interact on that basis?
I mean, I can give you that through an example. So I can share, having completed a pretty significant, very positive series of restorative meetings with two peers who are having a prolonged, very deep, very personal challenge with each other, having been very close friends for a period of multiple years. As many people as we can get into that process was valuable, because this was something that was transcending the school day. It was in their neighborhood. It was on every single social media platform. It was everywhere. And the conversation that we had with those students was, this is more like you're losing a loved one than you are a friend. And then having a person inside the building with which they felt supported by, they were very lucky that they both had another adult in the building, and also shared another adult in the building that they could rely on. And to be very frank, like the adults in the room outnumbered the kids because there were a number of adults there to provide that support in that situation. So this is absolutely a person that will provide something for someone. And the reality is in both of these school buildings, I wish I'd say there's always someone for someone, but there's not. And that's where diversification of these staff members allows you to increase the people that are there for those individuals that feel like they don't have that person. So I don't see why they couldn't be involved. But the other piece is when you're running a restorative, you really have to have people that have the experience. So it is something that like going through the appropriate training and then also seeing it modeled and then going through the process because it is a slog. And, it really takes, they are not as quick or as easy as what traditional school discipline is.
Just to piggyback, I was just going to say, just ensuring that they have the appropriate training to be running those restorative circles for us. But luckily at both of our buildings, we both have employees who are already trained in restorative practices and are able to kind of turnkey that to other personnel at this time. And I do see this individual being able to build relationships with certain students where it might be better coming from this person, especially if they're involved in the conversation about what the discipline might be or if there's a challenge with the student. And we also use base programming oftentimes in our in-school suspension room or in our after-school detention that I think this person could also help support in that they are using this program to have conversations with these students in depth about what is going on. And setting goals with them, and as well as a check-in, check-out person in that respect as well.
Great, thank you. And then I guess maybe on the other side of things, you mentioned here their role in searches. And again, I'm not, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on what the current practices are, and I assume this is part of that person, this would be that part of this person's training, would be the appropriate way to handle those searches, but what is the expectation there, and what do we expect that they would be involved with?
Yeah, thank you. So the expectation would be that the principal and administrator would lead any type of search. Of course, the school security officer would support in that role and help, especially when you may be searching for something that you feel police officers may be included eventually or something like that. So administrators would lead that role as they do now, but this would absolutely provide an extra support, extra set of hands that are trained in this area.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more question. What will you provide, or will there be any sort of, I don't want to say training, but what will your teachers be told about how to interact with a school security officer, right? And what will their, I guess, training be in terms of, when they know, how they know when to contact this person? I know you talk about building faculty relationships, obviously, that's critical, but what will be the expectation for the teachers?
Ultimately, it's very similar to what they're doing right now. They're just contacting a building administrator. So saying that you would be contacting a school security officer to handle your classroom discipline is not something that would be happening. And I think generally in these situations, that's like the common concern that people have is that this person's going to come in, they're going to charge into situations, and they're going to act in a way that is wholly inappropriate. So this position has no desire to be added on as this heavy in this type of situation. So like the deployment of that person is going to fall under what, kind of was preliminary outline there, which really comes from the building administration. So, it's very similar to how we would design the way we have our staff physical duty locations around the building. So right now, each building has places where staff members are located throughout the day at arrival, dismissal, throughout the transition of the school day in order to ensure that transitional process is happening. This would be providing an additional person in those settings. But there are also opportunities for, again, in my experience with this type of position, these people could be an asset in the classroom where you bring them in to engage in a conversation about these things and use it in an educational way, but not in a punitive way. So again, it would be really at the administration is the person that would be directing this person, not the staff. And they would be, requesting assistance in the same way. And the likely assistance, we built a continuum of support that assistance, you're ultimately going to largely use school counselors as the initial person, student advisor, school administration. This person really is more of a global support, not necessarily an individual person that could be at the beck and call of teachers.
Great. Thank you very much.
I have another, just another layer of information maybe to share in response to your question. And Mr. Roof addressed this in terms of, it is about that relationship building with the staff as well. And you heard Mrs. Yancho talk about the individuals being a critical part of our core teams. And so I do think it's very important when we find the right individuals to intentionally make them and build activities so they are a part of the team. And it is also about clarifying the role and what they will be doing. And sometimes it's also helpful to say, and they will not be doing the following, as Mr. Roof mentioned, they are not the individual you call when you have a student with regard to a disciplinary situation, but they are the person to call in these situations. So it is about, clarifying those roles, and continually reinforcing those expectations in terms of, with our staff as well as with our students, so that we can be sure that there's clarity in terms of the roles.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Whitney. Ms. Ford?
I just had a question regarding, you had mentioned about a week's worth of training plus CPR. Is the training annual, or are there other trainings that will be ongoing just to keep, that person?
Sure. There is a introductory course, the SRO course, and that's a one-time course. However, there is a second level of SRO training. So if we felt that those individuals that were serving as security officers would benefit from the second level, we could always send them to that. Plus, there's also individual trainings that happen on certain, specific areas. For instance, restorative practice, if we felt like they might be beneficial to that, we could send them to that type of training, possibly, during the summertime or during a break. Things like that. So there's a whole host of different types of trainings in the area of safety and security that we could customize and tailor to. Maybe at one building they might need this, at another building it might be more helpful for them to have that. So there's going to be generalized training, which they all get, but then we could do some specific trainings as well. And then also for the CPI, it only lasts for 3 years.
Right.
And if you don't get recertified, you have to start all over again. CPR is the same thing. AED is the same exact thing. So some of those would be on a reoccurring basis to keep their certificate, if you want to say. And then some of the other trainings, like I said, would be customizable.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ford. Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, actually, I didn't have this question until you just mentioned something. So what are their roles going to be over the summer break?
So right now, they would not be working during the summer hours unless we deemed necessary that we might need them if we have some summer programming that we're running or something like that. But there would be some time that we would hopefully be able to set aside that they can do some of that training in the summertime. So they're in the building, ready to roll, come August when the students are back or when the faculty, is getting there in servicing the faculty and staff.
Okay, so this is not a year-round position necessarily. It's more like how we have staff assistants and things like that?
It would be around that same time frame.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A couple people mentioned that we need to hire the right person, and I feel like whenever anybody hires anyone, they want to make sure they hire the right person. So I'm just wondering what you're going to do to make sure that happens. Like, how are you going to screen the candidates to make sure that you don't accidentally hire, for example, someone who's too aggressive with the students or who is easily triggered by middle schoolers and things like that?
So we would plan to use our, what I think is a rigorous hiring process, where we start with paper screening and look at experience, and we bring people into a first round interview with a team of several individuals, including our administration, possibly teachers, central office staff, then move to another round of final interviews. And so throughout that process, we feel as administration that we can find the right people. We also kind of laid out a job description, which essentially kind of, this is what we're looking for, and then that team can kind of debate and discuss, is this the right fit for us, and make sure that we're going to offer the right person the position. And if we don't find the right position, we'll start over and to continue to look, and we're not going to settle for just, okay, well, we're just going to go with this person because they applied for the position. We're going to work through our process, which I explained, and make sure we get the right person.
Because I just would imagine that people don't necessarily broadcast during an interview, oh, I plan to be overly aggressive with students. Like, they know not to answer questions a certain way, that it's going to be a red flag. And so, I mean, given the care that we need to put into who we put in these positions, I feel like we need maybe a little more than the usual hiring process, if that makes sense. So a way to try to get at the right personality.
Since we're looking for some individuals with some experience of having worked, we would heavily rely upon our reference checking process as well, to check into the references of those individuals they put and expand upon that to really take a look at what kind of performance they've had in this area and what they've done so far, and looking at their resume and also following through on those reference checks.
Okay, thank you.
The one other thing that I would add there too is like, they're not like claw machine into the job on day one. So I think there's also a very important thing that occurs when they are onboarding. And that onboarding is, you model the appropriate behaviors that you're going to have the same way you would do in a classroom if I was teaching the classroom. So I would anticipate in both settings that person is spending a lot of time with us. They're going to be joint, I don't envision not going to said emergency situations in the building ever. So I think it's an additional person that's there. We're modeling the appropriate reaction to those things. We're providing feedback on those. And invariably everyone can grow in those interactions, especially with 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And then I also think, to Dr. Pavlidis' points, a deep transparency in that hiring process too, that it's very clear about what the buildings are like and what it's like to be in middle school. Mrs. Yensho and I are both going through hiring processes right now, and I know that we make that very clear. This is what a middle school is like. This is what this is going to, and middle schools are a great, I spent my entire career in high school. I would never envision going into a high school again, because I think I've really enjoyed the place that I'm in and the experience with that age of child. So there are people that want to be in that place, and you have to be picky, and you have to onboard, and that onboarding never stops. And that speaks to Mrs. Ford's question about training. That training is, while it might not be, formulaic to a specific program, it's continual, and it's forever.
Thank you. Could you help me understand the difference in role for a few positions? Because it seems like there's a little bit of overlap. And also, could you, because I don't think everybody on the board knows what the student advisors are, so if you could just explain that, but also in the sense of how are they going to be different from this security professional? And then also, it sounds like maybe staff assistants are doing some of the work that the security professional might be doing. And can you explain what will change because you have this new member on board?
Well, go ahead.
I can speak directly to the staff assistant question. Because we are trying to find ways to mitigate some of the challenges within our buildings at this time. In between class periods, I won't speak for IR, but I do have some of my staff assistants out into the hallways at some of our hotspot areas just during that transition time. In no way are they doing anything like we would be asking for the school security officer. They're just another body there who has a walkie-talkie or a way to communicate with us if there are any concerns and to get kids where they need to be. Okay.
Yeah, and I would, echo that with the staff. We are not using. I have one staff. We have one staff assistant that's kind of somewhat doing that, primarily in the cafeteria, but not in that. I will say that all of us, Mrs. Yensho included, we will just be mobily moving around the building with our desks, and so we're filling a lot of these roles currently when we're available. In terms of the student advisor, I think this position bridges a lot farther out of, the student advisors are filling a lot of mental health support roles. So both student advisors in the two middle school buildings have a background in mental health supports for juveniles. So, and we've tried to really keep them out of sole discipline roles, very purposeful, because you're not going to build a relationship if you're the disciplinarian. So we still maintain, Mrs. Armstrong and myself and Mrs. Yencho and Mrs. Sladoff, like a lot of the disciplinary role, I think, as that position has evolved, because you don't build trust if I'm getting a detention and then I'm saying, well, let's talk about why you got the detention right afterwards. Like, there needs to be that. So I think this person is providing immediacy and support in events that are occurring throughout the school day, with which we might be in. So Mrs. Yencho and I today and tomorrow are going to spend most of the day in 8th to 9th grade transition meetings. And if we're leaving that meeting consistently to respond to these events, then we're not providing the oversight in the most critical transition time of the school, because we're responding to these, what I will say, medium level challenges. Now, we would get wrapped back into those things and then support them as needed, but this person really would be not as much of a deep mental health support and a direct student support. So it would really be someone that kind of provides the bridge to the student advisor. Because what we found also is the kids are lined up to be with the student advisors. So that position is not as flexible as we thought it was going to be, because they're doing such a good job, if that makes sense.
Let's make
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
One final point is these security officers will be going through SRO training, which separates them from what their job responsibilities and their training would prepare them to do. So I think that's a big difference.
Okay, I think I'm just trying to understand the difference. So, because you had mentioned, it sounds like you inherently know the difference, but I don't know it as a board member. So, so a staff assistant is in the hallway, sees a student doing something a student isn't supposed to be doing, or a security officer sees the same situation. Can you just tell me what the different response is? You mentioned, like, I understood that a staff assistant can't do certain things. What can the security officer do that the staff assistant can't do?
Right. I would say that our staff assistants are really only out there during transition time, like any adult, right? So I would say any adult in the building during a transition time, including staff assistants, our office secretaries, our instructional assistants, everyone has the same job to keep everybody safe. So anyone who would see something during that time would certainly relay that information to us. The difference is our staff assistants and our instructional assistants during like content time or during the day are with students. This school security officer would be walking our hallways and have access to the vape alarm goes off, for example. They can be running to bathrooms. Our staff assistants don't get that information. So hopefully that will help delineate information. If a 777 goes off and we have an emergency in the building, they would help and go to that, where a staff assistant wouldn't.
Okay.
Because they don't have that
That's
training.
helpful. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah.
And then the other piece is, like, I think there's also, like, the high school uses staff assistants very differently than what's happening elsewhere. And like another great example is we all have a digital hall pass system. I sat in the hallway today and I had it up, and child walks by, no pass. And I say, oh, you're not in the hall pass system. And, oh, I forgot. But then I see a child that they're on a block where they're not supposed to be meeting up in the hallway. So, like, very simple conversation and saying, hey, and like they know already. So it's like, hey, did you guys know that you're like, and then it's like that person is having those conversations, which is likely preventing something potentially that could go awry.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That does. You actually get into my last question. You made it sound as if just their presence prevents problems, and maybe that to some degree is true, but it sounds like maybe there's more to it than that. And I was just wondering if you can get into the prevention through relationship building and like the example that you just gave about asking them why they're there. I think I'm just trying to understand how somebody who can't do a lot of things, right? They really can't put their hands on the students or do anything like that, as far as I understand it. So how do they actually prevent some of the worst problems that we're seeing with behavior?
I honestly think it's really about understanding kids and building those relationships. And I know we keep saying that. And there is a difference when Mr. Roof and I walk down the hallway, because kids automatically straighten up, right? But we do see that our teachers who take time, and I think the same with the school security officer who really gets to know kids want to step up They want structure, they want to follow the rules, and they want to do good. And so when you have that strong relationship and you see that person, you automatically want to do better. And really, that's what it is about, finding the right person who has that sense of humor, who's going to be like, hey, buddy, how was basketball practice today? To some of our students who we know might be making poor choices, but now that I've built a relationship, when I see that individual, I really do want to do better because I want them to be proud of me. So it's about spending that time with kids in these locations, which are our hallways, our cafeterias, after-school sporting events, where they're really going to get to know the kids. They do want to step up.
I think the other thing as well is like there's a whole group of students that literally they just want that one oh, I know that person's there, then I feel like this is a place that I can go do those things. And how it's presented to the child or to the whole school, how it is then reinforced through their actions, that builds that capacity to recognize that this person is here for me and not against me. And then that's an ongoing thing. So like even when we have back to school night, the person is sitting at a table, introducing themselves, having a conversation. And that's a huge differentiating factor because right now, a staff assistant would be a 29-hour-a-week position. This is a position that we would, they're here from the start of the school day to the end of the school day. They're supporting those critical components throughout the day. And then it is somebody that is also attending sporting events, is also doing those other things to like reinforce those, positive components of the school day.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bowman. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, Mr. Roof, you started touching on my point.
Mr. Kelly, could you make sure to speak in the...
Sorry. Just this position. First off, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I'd love to see a team as opposed to one. And the objectives for this one person seem to be a lot. Before, after school, sporting events, hallway appearances, meetings. Is there a, and the person's going to be out at times. As you view this position, is this something where you're going to keep the status quo with like your morning arrival, teachers out there on their duties, and this person is now aiding and organizing and in charge of that? Or is this that where other people are going to be alleviated from having to be in the hallway and have those appearances?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we're at a place where we could alleviate the staff in the hallway between both buildings. I think that it's obviously evolving, and to your point, when you compare staff around the Lehigh Valley, this is an area of shortcoming that we currently have from a building when we talk to our colleagues at the middle level. They all have one, at least SRO and or school security, and many have both. And how they're being employed or used is very different depending on the area, but that's really also very different. And I think that we have very similar philosophies, and so the uniformity in that process would be there. But it really is going to depend on, again, how the hiring process goes, the onboarding, where we look at that person and then looking at the needs on a pretty routine basis and how we can build that person's capacity in that. And again, it is very lofty what we're saying, but part of this is the critical component of building those relationships. You have to be involved in a lot of those conversations.
Mr. Jankowski.
Thank you for the presentation. So you have pretty clear criteria for what you're looking for here. At what point do you kind of settle for someone if you're not seeing candidates and try to utilize the training to get them to where you are? Because, one of my concerns is if you get the wrong person, this could blow up your whole program, and the credibility is shot, and you're not going to have the impact. So, do you get to a point where, yeah, we want someone in spring, we're not finding someone, so we're going to hire the best of what we have instead of waiting until we find what we have, or waiting until we find what we want?
I mean, it's interesting. We can compare that to both of us have had a very similar experience with math teachers. So we both have gone through a process together 2 years ago where we were interviewing together and we didn't like any of the candidates. So we reopened the position. And when you look at the most critical components here, you just have to have, and we had a conversation, the two of us together, and said, well, we're going to continue going here. Job gets reposted, you then get people, and we both got people that we're really happy with. So I think that it's just a matter of we're doing this right now without this person. So to your point, I'm not. I think yeah, we're not going to just say, oh, we're going to hire this person because they're here. It's more about fit is more critical here than just finding a body.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. And then kind of piggybacking what Mr. Kelly said, this is a lot for a person in understanding that, our current state where we're utilizing teachers, administrators, staff, how long do you think you need before you come back and say, you know what, we need two people here. Like you said, Mr. Roof, you have 900 people, and you have 1,100. Like at what point, one person is one person, and this is a tall order. Not to keep, saying what Mr. Kelly said, but I do think he makes a very valid point.
I'll jump in and share that we articulated at the start of the presentation in terms of the vision for school security personnel for our middle level would be eventually to have an SRO in each building. That might then also include the resource officer so that we can start to build teams within our buildings. So that's a tough question in terms of how soon. Again, we continue to work with our local law enforcement to say, what are you seeing in terms of recruitment and the pipeline of SROs availability? And it might be a year, it might be 2 years for us. We're not giving up on the vision and continuing to support students and staff, but there are some factors, particularly with the SRO piece, that are a little bit outside of our direct circle of influence right now. And so that's where we're attempting to, phase in some supports that we do believe could have a positive impact. I will also say, sometimes I think we do such a great job of presenting an overview of the job responsibilities, and we envision that the individuals might support kids and staff in this way and this way and this way. And I didn't hear the question explicitly from the board, but I sensed a little bit of, oh my gosh, you almost have these people doing so much. Are they going to do anything really well? And so that's why we rely very much on our leaders, again, who are doing much of the work described every day, as well as teachers, and other staff members. And so it is about prioritizing and having a clear sense as to what do we want their daily expectations to be, but knowing that we're going to have to continue, particularly anytime you're starting a new position and building a new program, you have to really be attuned to that and continue to revisit it and say, you know what, I want you to focus here for now. This is really going to be our initial priority maybe for this spring. Because if we just pile too much on, certainly we might set the person up not for a really successful experience.
No, thank you for that. I understand I'm asking the administration to be prognosticators tonight, so maybe you can put crystal balls in your priorities for the March presentation.
Sure, although I will say, just to go there, I don't know, you likely will not see SROs just because we still have a sense from our law enforcement that it's probably not a realistic timeline for next year either, just because of the pipeline of hiring. And so I want to be realistic with our board and our community as well. But we'll certainly keep talking about it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Can I just say thank you for starting this process and taking this on? I think it's vital for our schools. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Whitney, or Dr. Whitney?
Just very simply, how do you measure success, and when? How do we know? Let's assume, let's say you found perfect people, right? You found great hires, awesome. They're awesome people doing awesome work. What does that look like, though, and how do we know that it's having the effect that we need, other than helping alleviate a very overburdened staff? which I completely respect and understand is part of the purpose here.
My simple answer to that is not that we're going to have specific data to share with you, although there are certain areas we could definitely, be talking about, like how many response calls did they have to vapes or this or that. But my simple answer is really that we become more proactive than reactive. And as Mr. Roof said, already with our student advisors and our student supports coordinator, we are seeing those steps already. So with this person, we're hoping that's going to be even more present. So that's how I will measure the success of our building.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Actually, I have a question. So we presently have an SRO at the high school. And we've had this person or a person in this role for several years at this point. Certainly have had an opportunity to observe how this person can be integrated into the school community and what impact that an individual can make. What can we say about our experience and observations having the SRO in the school? How can we be optimistic that having someone in that role is indeed going to work in our middle schools? If you understand the question.
I think so, yeah. And I think we have a lot of positive experiences with the SRO. I don't know if Dr. Mirabelle wants to add anything else, but I think we can model some of those characteristics and traits of what we're finding in that position and kind of mirror those to copy into where we're headed in the middle school positions as well. I don't know if you have anything else.
I think when we look at the SRO position at the high school, it's that's once again is a preventative, obviously, thing, but and a responsive thing, but it's that bridge and connection that the SRO makes. The SRO goes into the classroom, the SRO presents some information in government classes, the SRO is at lunchtime with the students and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of prevention there, but there's a lot of time when the presence of the SRO helps to de-escalate a situation before it's really before it can get out of hand as well. So once again, it's finding that right person. And when Dr. Campbell was talking about the recruitment process, when someone wants to be an SRO, they don't apply, go to the academy, and then say, I'm going to go into the SRO program. They have to have so many years of service on the street and with the public and with the community. And then that provides an opportunity for someone who is an experienced officer that maybe wants to move more towards working with students to be able to be replaced, so then they can move into that type of a position.
Okay. Thank you. I'd just like to take a step back and maybe highlight some of the things that I heard and go along with this presentation. I do agree that we do need to have the right person, and so I think it is going to take special individuals to fulfill this role, and it's going to be very important that we take care in finding who that person is and seeing obviously the experience, but also the potential to be integrated into each of our middle schools. I appreciate the fact that we want to see this person become a member of the school community. Obviously, somebody who's in the SSO or SRO role does have a role to play in terms of discipline, but more so having the person in the community and being someone to look up to, set a good example, and things like that are important lessons for the students. I appreciate the fact that we're approaching this for bringing people in and giving them the training that they need to be successful, and certainly setting forth the expectations that we want that person to have. I appreciate the fact that some of you articulated that you have personal experience with having SSOs in the schools and seeing that observation and seeing the impact that those people have, which I think should give the board some confidence that is going to be something that's going to make an impact. I also hear that the buildings, while we have the student advisors who are making their impact, and everybody, from the faculty to the assistants to the administration is all working as a team in order to make things successful in there, but you still identify a need, and this appears to fulfill a need that we're looking for. And I also want to mention, again, through having a number of conversations and listening to people in the community, the community wants to see an enhancement of what's going on in our middle schools and to help with the environment. So, I think the fact that for this budget year, we allocated funds to bringing in personnel to fulfill that need, I think is important and signifies that, we take this seriously and we want to make sure that our schools and our school environment are as safe and secure and enjoyable as possible. So if there are no other questions, I'd just like to close and thank you again for the presentation. And, we look forward to, considering what we've heard tonight and moving forward with potential approval in a future meeting. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, again, that was very good. That's big presentation number 2. We'll move on to business operations. If there are no objections, I'd like to take items A through E together. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns that the board would like to bring up? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
I would just like to call out under item C, the donation that we've received from Lehigh Valley Educators Credit Union to provide financial support toward the improvement of student education in the amount of $10,000. Again, we really appreciate what our community does on behalf of our students. Next item on the agenda is curriculum. First item, item A, is on educational conferences. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Item B, the East Penn School District data presentation. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
I would. Our assistant superintendents, Ms. Whitman and Dr. Popolitis, will be providing an overview, a comprehensive overview of our school progress measures from the 22-23 school year. In particular, they will share with you an overview of how our students performed on standardized assessments, identify strengths and areas for growth, and then we'll really talk about, from a district perspective, work that we have in progress at each level to support student growth in each area.
All right, so we are looking forward this evening to share with all of you some of the progress of our schools and just really an overview of kind of where that comes from, some of the data that we look at, and the processes we have in place. This is just from the PA Future Ready Index. It's the district's Fast Facts. It's available for anybody to access it on the internet. There's also building level information and demographic information by each building. We're not going to have all that information for all of our buildings here, but just letting you know that that's also available. So some basic district facts here. Additionally, each building has that information available as well. To really start with this presentation, we want you to have an understanding of why the data that we look at. I want to start with at the bottom piece of this slide. The most important use of all the data is for our ongoing school improvement process for us to improve student learning and make for better experiences in the classroom for our students. But pulling back a little bit, ESSA is federal law, Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA requires each state to provide standardized tests. In Pennsylvania, they're called PSSAs and Keystone exams. They also require us to show each state to be transparent in performance and show performance in some way, shape, or form. In Pennsylvania, looking to the left on the slide, the Future Ready PA Index, that is Pennsylvania's portal or way of publicizing information that's required by ESSA. In addition, Pennsylvania chooses to share other information that helps us to see what kind of progress our students are making, look at certain indicators of success, and provide a measurement for the community, for administration, for parents, and for students to see. Moving all the way to the far right, Act 13 is a Pennsylvania state law that ties together with all of this. Act 13 is specific to a law about evaluation of teachers and other professional employees. And part of Act 13, if you teach a course with PSSA or Keystone exams, there's actually a score that is in your evaluation tied to that. If you have 3 years of consecutive data of growth data or PVOS data, which we talked about, which is essentially growth of students from one year to the next, that's also part of Act 13 and required in evaluations. And one last piece is a building score that's also part of Act 13 required through that law. That is part of the evaluation of teachers. And so I'm going to kind of end with where I started. The most important piece of all of this isn't just about these laws, but we use this data to help create goals, action plans, and improve student performance and improve our targets of where we want to go with teaching and learning and success of students. So specific to building level data, which I just talked about with Act 13, there's building level scores. What we're going to go through here is we're going to look at all of the building level data. Well, not all, but just kind of look at a snapshot of building level data that we have. In addition to the building level score, some information I had shared about proficiency and growth in some of our subject areas for each of the buildings. I'll just give a quick overview of each one. I did speak about the building level score. One piece in the building level score is the challenge multiplier. And so when the slides coming up, you're going to see a building level score for each building. So that is made up of, and I'll just kind of take a look here. So a building score for a school, I'll just jump to Alberta's here. You see 76.7 there. So for that building level score, there's a couple things that go into place here. So there's assessment information, there's growth data, there's attendance data, and graduation rate data. And so a quick overview of that for proficiency, meaning like proficient or advanced students in ELA, 15% of that goes into a building score. Proficiency on math, 15% goes into a building score. Proficiency on science, 10% goes into the building score. And then PVOS growth, switching to the next category, 15% in English language arts, 15% in math, 10% in science. Then attendance is 10%, graduation rate is 10%. That rounds out 100. If you don't have a graduation rate, it just doubles attendance rate to 20. So in quick summary, building score is proficiency, meaning students are proficient or advanced on a standard, growth, and also attendance rate and graduation rate. So that's what the building score is. The challenge multiplier on the slide before that I had talked about, that in quick summary is essentially takes into consideration the percent of students that are economically disadvantaged in your building. And it can add points at the end of what I just explained. It adds points if your economically disadvantaged numbers are high, it adds points to the building score based on the percent. So I'll jump right into Alberta's here, and as we'll move through each of the buildings. So if you take a look at the top at your screen here, the building score for Alberta's was 76.7, which I already indicated. That's around the middle compared to schools in Lehigh, Carbon counties. All students met the goal for proficiency on ELA, math, and the science PSSA. You can see that across the top in the green color. Green indicates that the target was met. The interim targets for ELA is 69.1%. The target for math is 54%, and the target for science is 72%. So if they met the interim target, the interim target is basically set each year, it goes up to 2033. So each year it does increase as far as what the expectation is for that target. And so this building met all three of those targets. If you go to the growth part in the bottom, this is PVOS and its growth. All students met the goal for PVOS in math and ELA at Albertus. They did not meet the growth standard in science, which is indicated by the red color. So moving on to Jefferson. Jefferson's building score was 73.1. They did not meet the proficiency target for math and ELA proficiency. They did not meet the target in science proficiency. I'm sorry, they did meet the target in science proficiency as indicated by the color green at the top right. Moving down to growth, they did meet the growth target in math, ELA, and science. For Lincoln, building score was 77.2, which is the upper middle in comparison to other schools in Lehigh, Carbon counties. Lincoln did not hit the target for proficiency in math and ELA. They did meet the target in science. In PVOS at the bottom, indicated by blue, Lincoln exceeded the growth score in math and also in ELA. They did not meet the growth target in science. For Macungie, 75.4. Macungie did not meet the proficiency target for ELA, but they did meet the proficiency target for math and science. Moving down to the bottom, they did meet the growth standard for ELA. They did not meet the growth standard in math, but they did meet the growth standard in science. Shoemaker at 85.9. Building score, this was the fourth highest score in all elementary schools in Lehigh, Carbon counties. We're very happy about that. They just missed the proficiency target in ELA. They met the target in math and exceeded the statewide goal for 2033 in science. And so that's 83%. So that's the goal for 2033. Indicated by blue, they already achieved with that percentage of the goal in 2033. And so that's why it's blue. If you go to the bottom, they exceeded the growth standard in ELA, math, and science. West Coastville at 78.3 was upper middle compared to Lehigh, Carbon County. Did not meet the target in ELA. They did meet the proficiency targets in math and science. At the bottom, looking at growth, they did exceed the growth standard in ELA, and they met the growth standard in math and science. And then Willow Lane at 80.4. Willow Lane was the upper middle compared to Lehigh and Carbon County schools. They met the proficiency target for ELA, math, and science, and they exceeded the growth standard at the bottom, the PVOS growth standard for ELA and math. They did not meet the growth standard in science. I'll turn it over to Ms. Whitman.
Hello. So Lower Macungie Middle School is no longer in TSI. Lower Macungie Middle School's overall building score was one of the highest in Lehigh and Northampton counties. The red color that appears across the top indicates that the LMMS did not meet state interim goals in terms of percentage of proficient and advanced specific to key student groups. Based on last year's testing and using state terminology for subgroups that include students identified as Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, as well as students with disabilities. The blue and green across the bottom shows that all student groups exceeded 1 year's growth in ELA and math at Lower Macungie last year. This includes all of the students in the previously mentioned subgroups. In science overall, students met the standard for 1 year's growth with some subgroups exceeding 1 year's growth and one subgroup labeled combined ethnicity trending down. Just for the community's purposes, what you see on the icon, the blue icon between the building score and the definition, that's actually a 5-year historical timeline of the score and how it trended pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. It's also notable that this year at Lower Macungie exceeded statewide averages in advanced percentage in ELA and math. It was less than 0.5% from the statewide average percentage last year in science. Iron Middle School's overall building score was 67.4 for last year. While exceeding state averages in proficiency in while not exceeding state averages in proficiency in ELA, math, and science, IR has not rebounded to pre-COVID proficiency percentages quite yet. No specific subgroup of students is singled out from the downward trend that emerged post-pandemic in standardized test proficiency. In terms of growth, students on the whole did not meet the standard for 1 year's growth, with the exception of students identified as Black in the student subgroups in ELA. All students, with the exception of students with disabilities and students identified as economically disadvantaged, met the standard for 1 year's growth in math as state classified subgroups. A reminder to the board and public that Iron Middle School currently houses our specialized programs, and not all students with disabilities in those programs qualify, nor necessarily should take the PASA, which is Pennsylvania's alternative system of assessment. However, that continues to be a factor in an overview of testing when comparing all students or students with disabilities between Lower Macungie and Iron Middle School. It is also notable that this year is the first year IRD transitioned away from the year-long grading and into the same trimester marking periods as Lower Macungie. IRD did exceed statewide averages in advanced percentages in ELA, math, and science. Emmaus High School met ELA proficiency targets provided by the state. It did not meet the target in science, however, it is trending up as compared to the pandemic downturn. Math continues to be an area of concern with a downward trend. However, there are many factors impacting the score for EHS related to the pandemic. This includes a large portion of our test takers, typically proficient and advanced, not increasing EHS's overall building score due to their non-numerical proficiency status, what we call NNP. This was a status granted during the pandemic. Some schools have opted to have these NNP students retest. We did not. These students were in 8th grade during the pandemic, and we did not see a purpose in testing them 1 year later for the purposes of a higher score. As far as growth, ELA exceeded 1 year of growth for all student subgroups with the exceptions of students identified as Asian. Math did not meet the measure for overall growth, but again, please remember this does not measure growth for all students in the 11th grade cohort as they took Algebra 1 in either 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. That growth measure only measures students who took Algebra 1 Keystone at EHS last year. Science overall exceeded the annual measures for growth, with historically underperforming student groups meeting expectations and students identified as Hispanic not meeting the standard for annual growth. The Keystone Literature Advanced percentage has not been met in the state advanced percentage average over the last 5 years. However, last year was the first time EPSD Algebra Keystone fell under the statewide advanced percentage average. Science has exceeded the statewide advanced percentage averages prior to the pandemic. It has rebounded to less than 0.5% under that statewide biology Keystone advanced average last year.
Okay, on this next slide, you can see where our East Penn elementary schools fall within demographically alike schools from around the area. And so we, of course, did not include the names of the other schools, but we did include all of our East Penn schools. You can just kind of get a visual there. This includes all of the information that's included in the building score. Building scores on the far right, including the challenge multiplier there, so you can just get a sense of where we are. Lehigh Carbon, which I indicated a lot as I was going through each of the buildings as far as where we fell in comparison to Lehigh Carbon counties, and you can see again the comparison here and where we fell.
In the green highlights, you can see Eyre with a building score of 67.4 and Lower Macungie with a building score of 77.9 among middle schools from the demographically alike districts. This slide compares Lehigh Carbon middle schools. Please note the proficiency percentages in math among middle schools in the Lehigh Valley. This slide is an overview of those same districts that we viewed for demographically alike and compared Emmaus High School against other demographically alike high schools. And this slide compares Lehigh Carbon high schools. I would like to note that it has been publicly shared that Emmaus High School has been identified for targeted support this year. Emmaus High School has not only engaged with their SILT, but also formed a TSI group of stakeholders to formulate their TSI plan. Administration from Emmaus High School will be presenting their analysis and their plan for improvement in depth at the next school board meeting on February 26th. It is also important to note that we have not instituted measures such as remediation for the biology keystone when students are no longer taking biology, nor retesting of the students who received a non-numerical proficiency during the pandemic in order to increase our high score on standardized tests. We do not plan to do these things to improve scores at this time. We continue to test students at the end of the targeted grade level and keystone courses. Retesting for keystones will only occur for students that are predicted close to passing based on PBAS.
Okay, so I'm just going to pick up where I started the presentation, and we talked about there's a lot of data, and it comes from a lot of different laws and federal law and a lot of other things, but the most important thing is our continuous improvement process and our focus on continually improving. And so just to take a look at this slide a little bit, starting with number 1 over here, data retreat and SILT. Our school and instructional leadership teams are comprised of building leaders, faculty, teachers, our administration at the building level. They look at the data, they analyze data, formulate action plans for the upcoming school year, monitor progress, and make adjustments as needed. Meeting in the summer to kind of look at a lot of the data that they have, the new data that's released, and then an ongoing process throughout the year to analyze that data and create goals. Data step back, which we introduced this year. The SILT team meets 3 times a year. That building team, again, that building of administration, teachers, and other staff members will present information to our cabinet members. At this point, it's not only the SILT team sharing data, talking about their analysis process. It's also an opportunity for people to ask questions, share things that are working really well, and to gain an understanding of what other buildings are doing. It's also an opportunity to collaborate, problem solve, and discuss common barriers that we see and themes, data themes and trends that we see across buildings. So it's an opportunity for everyone to come together, see the information data presented, and also continue to work towards improvement. And then the final piece here is implement the action plan, which is most important. It's not just about the data, but what to do with it. Each building has an action plan, as well as accountability measures related to instruction, intervention, social emotional learning, and then deliberate attention to our equity framework. And so each building creates an action plan where they monitor, they have measurable goals that they're working towards, and specific action plans aligned with professional development that the building plans, and then ongoing assessment of how they're doing throughout the process and throughout the year. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. So what are we doing at the district level to support all of this work? So at the elementary level, so K through 5, alignment of curriculum resources to the science of reading research. We've implemented Foundations, which is a phonics program in grades K to 2. The use of more decodable texts for small group reading instruction, which encourages and forces students to really help decode more words instead of just looking at patterns that are occurring. Explicit instruction through close and model reading in grades 3 through 5. So truly having the skills in order to read text and help comprehend text and understand grade level text, and have that modeled, as well as going through a process of really how to truly read and think as you're reading and improve the skills. Void Your Passport is an intervention implemented in grades 3 through 5, which has a specific focus on phonics and also component on comprehension as well. K-5 Science of Reading Professional Development for all teachers. You can see bulleted up there the focus areas for that professional development. Realignment to grade level eligible content. Eligible content is the standards that are assessed on the PSSA and expectations. So grades 3 through 5 include added grade reading materials in those grade levels to really focus on what the students really know and need to be able to do. We thank you to the board. We've added district-funded interventionists for instruction intervention. There's one in each of the 7 elementary buildings to help support this work. For math, K-5, focus on small group instruction, so differentiation between small groups where you can specifically look at what students need and provide that small group instruction to support what it is that they need to make sure that they have an understanding of those standards. Classroom visits in all the elementary buildings. Experts from our OTL office go and work with our building principals with a specific focus on an area that they're looking at. They'll go and visit the classrooms. And really, this is not about an individual look at you, I got you, but really kind of get a sense of the whole building and look at multiple different buildings and focus on specific look-fors and areas. Take that back, and then the team can talk and discuss what they saw, what they really, really liked, and areas that are needed, see if there's trends across the buildings, and then provide professional development in areas of need, maybe specific to a building, and also analyze and evaluate what's needed across the district using that data. Setting building-wide math goals. Each of the elementary building has specific goals and incremental goals that they put into a plan so that it's not just a goal for the end of the year, but it's goals throughout the year. They look to see, are they on target, using our data throughout the year to essentially measure where they are and focus or refocus if needed to make sure they're making progress towards the end of the year goals. They have school-wide plans that 5 of the 7 are submitted because they're Title I schools to the state, and those school-wide plans are really aligned with what we're doing in all of our buildings with data step back focus in our action plans. We also had the addition of 2 math intervention teachers. We used Title I funds for this starting in 22-23, and that continues in this school year as well. These math intervention teachers support math needs in 4th and 5th grades.
On this slide, you can see the action steps taken or work in progress in regards to literacy, curriculum, instruction, and assessment in ELA. In summary, teachers worked with building administration and the Office of Teaching and Learning to ensure content and instructional expectations mirrored grade level expectations. There have been Tier 1 data reviews with teachers this year that focus not only on standardized testing, but screener data and course assessment data. There have been additional common assessment work and also a rollout of Keys to Literacy training. Middle school teachers in all areas had professional development in Keys to Literacy this past year. In this upcoming March PD, Keys to Literacy training will roll to the EHS Social Studies, English, and Special Education departments. And we are planning for a staggered rollout to other departments in the future. We continue to offer evidence-based interventions like Orton Gillingham and rewards to students who need it, and we are expanding the staff trained to provide that intervention. On this slide, we have action steps taken or work in progress in regards to curriculum instruction and assessment in math. As a result of collaborative work with middle-level math teachers, the Office of Teaching and Learning reviewed our current iReady resources last year and reaffirmed moving forward with iReady resources to target PSSA anchor standards. Additionally, adjustments were made in light of teacher feedback to pacing, as well as intentional inclusion of math fluency practice and skill practice during period 9 at the middle school. In Algebra 1 and beyond, the board recently approved Stage 1 curriculum, and common assessment work is in progress. It is a multi-year process with a focus on tweaking and or creating additional curricular offerings for students who are struggling to access Algebra 1 content standards at Emmaus High School. There will be more on this at the next board meeting as part of EHS's TSI presentation, as well as a proposed addendum to our program of studies for next year. Okay, last but not least. On this slide, we have action steps taken or work in progress in regards to curriculum instruction and assessment as we prepare for the adoption of Pennsylvania's STEELS science standards that must be implemented in 25-26. STEELS stands for Pennsylvania's Science, Technology, Engineering, Environmental Literacy, and Sustainability Standards. All previous curricular materials and resources will be reviewed, and many components will be revised according to the STEELS standards and final decisions about the next generation of the Keystone for Biology. Curriculum writing within the middle level and high school science departments has already started. It will continue through the fall of 2024 when the board will be asked to review and vote on new science curriculum aligned to the PA STEELS standards. And we're ready for any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I'll open up the questions to the board. Mr. Kelly.
I'd just like to start by first saying thanks for answering all the questions that I've had and meeting with me, and I really appreciate that. Also, as a parent, thank you. My daughter has gone to some of these interventions, and the growth for the ELA has been great for her, so thank you very much. Couple quick questions that I have that, you know, as I read and as I listened, I didn't hear addressed the building level assessments, or not building level, district level, you know, as LMMS and IRE, as they work together with assessments and grading, and is there a fluency for students in say the honors or the college placement tracking, so that they know the expectations, and as they go through middle school, high school, kids in those trackings are kind of being held to the same standards, to the same level of assessments that would be similar on this?
So I think I shared, we're in the process, and we do plan on making grading and assessment part of our next comprehensive plan. And so I spoke to Mr. Kelly about this individually. What I do see is, as I had shared earlier, this is the first year that IRE came away from year-long grading to go to trimester grading. We have buildings at different points right now, and some of the things that have been there, embedded grading and assessment practices. So we continue to work within the secondary departments along the lines of common assessments and grading practices. But right now, the buildings are doing individual work based on where they've been in terms of, you know, again, what grading practices we need to do professional development on to become more cohesive. And then our plan is to articulate, as part of our next comprehensive plan, a district-wide grading and assessment continuum.
I couldn't remember through one of the meetings. Thank you. Also, I saw a lot of different information of what administrators and teachers were doing throughout the process. I didn't see anything mentioning middle school and high school classroom visits. Has there been a good deal of?
Yeah, so at the high school right now, a lot of our administrators and our Office of Teaching and Learning, and myself when possible, we engage in what we call the walkthrough process. So I did just look to see like where we were at. We have a spreadsheet that we share among ourselves where we give feedback to teachers as part of that process. But we've conducted among our secondary team 694 walkthroughs at this point in the school year, and 439 at the elementary. And so we do continue to make sure that we're in classrooms to see what's going on in a not pre-planned way, and that's in addition to our formal observation process, which you're familiar with, but it's typically where a formal observation process is where we meet with the teacher to talk about the planning for that period of instruction. We're there for the entire period of instruction, and then we meet again to provide feedback and any action steps that could be taken.
Also, you referenced the building plans that they were coming up with, and maybe that's just part of the next presentation, but is there a way for us to be able to see those building to building, what their main goals and
So I believe a lot of that was shared, was part of the data step back information. You would have heard what the specific building goals are. So that information I think was already shared with the board.
Okay, all right, I'll take a look at it. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Jankowski.
So I have to ask the question pertaining to the high school math scores in science. In light of these scores, does this, are there any concerns or questions about the elimination of the GP track, and whether that would not be more appropriate to have the dual tracks to help put more focus on the students that need more remediation? My concern, again, is with the action steps and measures that, you know, students who are in college prep may become disadvantaged because more focus is being put on students that maybe aren't prepared for that level and would be more appropriate in a general prep level. And, you know, are we looking into that to make sure that we're not going to hurt other students by by these steps and measures?
So I think there's a three-part answer to what you're saying. One, with math, there isn't a GP of math per se, and I think we've discussed this before at board meetings, but essentially based on acceleration of math and where students, the course taking that students engage in from 6th grade on in math, it tends to have accelerators advance towards algebra sooner. And then we tend to have, the group that then waits to take Algebra 1 in the 9th grade. I think post-pandemic, what we recognize is we have students who were more gapped based on where they were in their course taking in elementary and middle school. And again, there's a proposal that will come forward that might be a remedy that's short-term, but I don't know if we'd necessarily think we would have a need for like two pre-algebra courses at a high school level into infinity. I again would believe that K-8 structure is going to serve kids. We're going to be in school full-time and meet their needs every day and not see that type of gap that we've seen. In terms of, I think the other subject area you referenced was science. So at this point, I don't think there's any discussion about changing from where we are right now. However, the EHS team has a group of teachers who are participating in their TSI plan. They also look at the data as part of their data step back team. So those are two different teams now at Emmaus High School with different sets of stakeholders. And so again, I haven't perceived that as an action step for next year.
Okay, thank you.
When you say gap, do you mean how close they are to being proficient?
What we saw post-pandemic was more students who were functioning at 2 grade levels or below based on both screening information, and in some cases we were seeing kids without a PBOS prediction of being successful in Algebra 1. And so what we will be bringing forward as part of the TSI plan at the next board meeting is what we think is a hopefully short-term remedy that we wouldn't see the number of students who have that type of gap. Again, who might have missed upper primary grade and/or middle level math through a hybrid or remote setting.
Thank you. Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood a couple of things that you said. So because the high school is only being assessed on the algebra keystone for math, is that correct? That's the only.
The data, Mrs. Garriello is going to come in and share the data that triggered the TSI. Is that what you're asking me? Like what triggered the TSI?
And there's no PSSA. There's only the algebra keystone at the high school level.
Algebra, biology, and literature.
Yeah, okay. And so we have students who take algebra in 7th grade. There are like honors advanced math students. And then we have some who take it in 8th grade who are likely, I guess, even though you
still
don't have
accelerators.
this, but
Yeah.
right. You might think of them as college prep, even though that's not a designation that we use. When students take that keystone in middle school, were you saying that their scores don't count at the high school level?
Their growth, so because if the measures that were part of the TSI calculation was based on growth in math last year, only at Emmaus High School.
Okay.
So when you're talking about who's taking algebra where,
Yeah.
the growth attribution would go to Lower Macungie or Iyer for the algebra and the 8th grade keystone or the 7th grade keystone. Some of those students are taking 2 standardized tests.
Okay. They're taking because they're taking a PSSA and a keystone.
Correct, because
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
a grade
yeah,
level
yeah.
PSSA.
Okay, thank you. So basically, there are high-performing students, and their high scores are being attributed probably to the middle school level, which could be affecting, to some degree, the high school math scores.
So, and I think what I'd like to do is allow the EHS TSI team to go into the nitty-gritty of like where
I just wanted to make sure I understood it.
they'll go into that at their TSI presentation.
And if this is, because I think everybody just wants to go home, so this could be something you answer next time. But I'm also just curious if this is a cohort issue, because you have your LMMS students who moved up into the high school. LMMS's plan for targeted support really didn't even have enough time to make any change, and yet it's no longer on targeted support. So it sounds to me like that cohort of kids who were probably affected by the pandemic in some way is now in our high school. And then also not testing well. Would you say that that's the case?
That's a very fair assumption.
Okay.
We'll bring that data forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Flaggy?
Not to prolong this any longer tonight, but thank you for the presentation and for the 20 hours of video that I got to watch it. And believe me, I watched most of it. But I just have one real quick question. Have we dug into elementary schools when it comes to looking at like Shoemaker or Willow or Wescosville that scored higher than maybe Lincoln or Jefferson, and to what does they do there differently than maybe we do at Lincoln?
We do. Our teams, Office of Teaching and Learning, our principals, there's a lot of collaboration and discussion. And as, of course, through the data step backs, as we talked about, that's an opportunity to share and present and collaborate. So there's a lot of discussion on not just those buildings, but really all buildings where we're seeing, positive either growth or proficiency to discuss what's happening. And so I do believe that there is ongoing discussions about, the strategies that are working, instructional focused things that we see are successful, and then trying to share that with others and amongst the teachers as well. So yes, I believe we do that, but it's always something we can continue to work on and improve to make sure we're sharing the best of practices.
Yeah, it's just because when I looked at the numbers, I looked from 22 to 23, so a child going from third to fourth, and of course fourth to fifth. It just really stuck out to me, the kind of growth that they showed at those schools compared to some of our other elementary schools. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for the question. Are there additional questions from the board? I have a couple. So this continuous improvement process that we're using, the data retreat and SIL data setback action plan, is this a unique approach that we can attribute to this district, or is this something that's implemented and adopted by other districts to, again, look inward in order to try and improve what's going on?
I think there's other districts. I don't know the details of exactly what other districts do, but I think other districts are involved in data review and action planning. We are, specifically, proud of our plan and what we're doing, and the deep analysis and focus on action plan goals and continuing to monitor that. So I can really kind of speak to kind of what we have in place. But yeah, other districts, of course, have their own process.
Yeah,
Yes.
what I was trying to get at is I mean, this all makes sense in terms of what we're doing with the data and analyzing it and doing the plan. I was just wondering if there's a way to assess the efficacy of the approach. And if we can, have confidence and faith that this is going to achieve the goals that we're looking for.
So I think what Doug spoke to earlier, and it's completely accurate, we're following the state's process for improvement. And my goal wasn't to give Mr. Flaggy 20 hours of video, but I think the real point of the data step back process, or the process that we're engaged in right now, is you see teachers and administration and building to building having conversations about their data, about the actions that they're taking, again, so that we can get to a place of better cohesion. So when you talk about some of the goals Mr. Kelly articulated earlier about the experience being similar 6 through 12, I think we've experienced a period where buildings had some autonomy, and we're really trying to bring together all of the practices to be more consistent and more consistent experience for students.
And what we're doing here is does this add to the work and that teachers, administrators, et cetera, are doing, or is this kind of blended in with everything else?
So the data step back process is a new process this year in terms of presenting. We actually were approved by the state for this to be part of our leadership team's professional development. It counts for their hours for the state level. So we submitted the whole program to the state, and we have always had professional development for our leaders, but this time we're trying to learn from each other and also look at what's evidence-based in terms of action steps that we can take.
All right, so I'll just close by saying that, I appreciate this, using whatever we can in terms of data and understanding what's going on in the schools for continuous improvement. again, while regrettable that LMS, for instance, went into TSI, it did allow us an opportunity to look at what we're doing and make wholesale improvements across the board at the middle level. So, I can see how doing these kinds of things at the individual schools, and like Mr. Falegi commented, seeing what we're doing well in one school and carrying it forward is going to end up being a net positive. So again, thank you for the presentation. If there's no other questions, I think we'll move on. Item C under curriculum is the first look at the 24-25 school district student-teacher calendar. I didn't know if administration would like to make some comments about it.
Yeah, I'll ask Dr. Popolitis not to get too comfy in his seat there. But I'll just give a very high-level overview of the draft calendar that you see tonight. Again, tonight is informational. It's the first preview or review, I should say, of the calendar. The plan would be that the board would take action on the calendar at our first March meeting. That's been our process that we've followed as a board team in the past. Specifically, that provides multiple opportunities for the board and the community to give us feedback on the calendar. Again, that feedback from teachers, administrators, parents, and the school board is all taken into consideration. As in previous years, this calendar that you see in front of you was built with an attempt to certainly maximize and preserve instructional time, also balancing professional development needs that we have in the organization. Parent schedules are considered, and overall consistency with other school districts in Lehigh County, specifically so that we can maximize our LCTI programming for our students. In addition, there are certain contractual obligations in terms of total number of teacher days. This particular calendar, similar to last year, has 183 student days, 190 teacher days. There are 2 days built into the calendar for snow days. And as a reminder, the district is able to use up to 5 flexible instructional days per year, which you don't see reflected anywhere on this calendar. And now Dr. Popolitis is going to share with you the 3 main changes that you see in this calendar as compared to last year.
Okay, thank you. So based on feedback from our administrative team and everyone Dr. Campbell pointed out, the 24-25 calendar includes 1 additional Act 80 day compared to the current year's calendar. This will allow us to meet the new state professional development requirements and continue to address the many professional development needs that we have. We also moved several Act 80 days to the middle of the week with hopes to improve attendance from our students. We feel like the professional development in the middle of the week will serve us better and our students and our staff. The final change, after student administration feedback, we moved our March full-day professional development day to March 31st, so students have the day off to observe Eid. And so that concludes the changes for this year.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Popolitis. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
Dr. I just want to clarify, so these Wednesday half-days for students, full days for staff, professional development days, the rationale for that is, you said better attendance for students and staff? What is the rationale for using those days?
I think it's a focus on students. I think it's a combination of both. I think Wednesdays, just if we look at our data, attendance for students and for staff it's better. And so the importance and the time and effort that we put into this is important. We want to make sure that, we're making sure that it's impactful. And so moving it to Wednesdays, we feel will meet that need.
Just one other question. This is something that's always stuck out to me. I'm just going to put it out here. I've always had an issue with the start of the year and a 4-day week, followed by a 4-day weekend, essentially, followed by a 4-day week, and then we get into a 5-day week. Is there any thought ever or any possibility of starting after Labor Day? And I know that that's something that would take us well into June, but we already have these June days that are sort of kind of reserved.
So I mean, it's something that's been considered. I know when Dr. Campbell talked about the LCTI calendar, we try to stay somewhat consistent with other Lehigh County schools. And as you know, you would lose almost a week. You'd lose a lot of instructional days for our students. And so at this point in time, that's something that we take a look at. But consistency across Lehigh County is important to us. We've heard a lot of feedback too about moving the calendar up because of things like AP testing in the past from the board. We have feedback, AP testing, Keystone exams, PSSAs. The later you push it, you're now going a lot later in the school year, and it's very difficult to fit important instructional content in. And so all these are just kind of little pieces of reasons why we are where we are. So sure, it's considered, but that in this point in time, we laid out the calendar in this way for those reasons.
Yeah, all right, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the
I
question.
will also share, Dr. Whitney, I want to say not so long ago, but it was probably at least 5 years ago now, in which Lehigh County schools consistently began school prior to Labor Day. Prior to that, some districts began before Labor Day, some districts began after. And as Dr. Povolitis pointed out, one of the student groups that perhaps suffered the most in terms of instructional time was then our LCTI students, just because their program could not consistently meet all those different needs.
Yeah, thank you.
From a teacher's perspective, I would say that having the 4 days and then a day off is the beginning of the year is exhausting. The initiatives, the systems, the rosters, the changes, and everything. So to have 4 days initially and then have a little break is followed by a 3-day weekend or a 4-day weekend is pretty nice.
All right, yeah, thanks. I
Healing.
hadn't considered that. And is it pretty universal that Friday is off across the county?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right,
What a,
well,
what a nice Christmas break too, next year.
It is quite a long holiday break, yes.
okay, well, thank you for adding that point, Mr. Kelly. Are there any other comments, Mr. Flagey?
I just have one quick question, and I did get the answer, but I just want to get it out there so I don't get all these parents coming to me asking me these questions or emails. So the 27th of November is a half a day prior to the Thanksgiving break. And last year I had a lot, and this year, of people reaching out to me asking why we don't do parent-teacher conferences the 25th, 26th, 27th. Instead of having a half day, we would have the half day 27th for conference off the 28th, 29th, and 2nd, and then come back for those, because it's kind of goofy, like you have one full day, and then all of a sudden, half days. So if we can just explain to everyone out there why we do that.
Sure, no problem. So I'll just give a quick overview. So you see that where the trimester ends on November 14th. And so when that ends, there's about 2 weeks of time where you have teachers, then the trimester is over. They're putting, comments, a lot of administrative duties, printing report cards, making sure you're loading it onto PowerSchool. And so to put conferences in that block of time when all that work is being done, you really need the 2 weeks of time for those kind of administrative duties, let's call, of the work from the teachers, from our administrative staff to get report cards prepared. And we've discussed this at length. The teachers feedback from the teachers and our administrative teams prefer that report cards are in hand or at least accessible to parents prior to the conference. So that kind of sums it up.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question.
I will say, I appreciate the question, and we too, as an administrative team, actually asked that question of ourselves, and again, teachers and elementary administrators, in terms of, does this make sense? And meaning having that the parent-teacher conference the week after that we get back from the Thanksgiving break. We also, Mr. Falegi, to that point, really do look at, we've tried to minimize disruptions in weeks to the greatest extent possible. so that we have like consistent blocks of instructional time. So we look at when are we offering professional development, so can it be staggered, and are we avoiding standardized testing periods and things like that. Again, you'll see that some of our early dismissal days most of them are actually professional development days for staff. Some of them, I will also say, are days in which employees might leave early as well as compensation for the time that they're here for evening conferences. So there's, that's where there are nuances to the placement of some of those early dismissal days. But thank you for the
Thank you.
question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Klotz?
So I've also had parents come to me and ask why we have multiple half days. And I think what you were talking about, Dr. Campbell, actually got into this. But could you just explain for the public why we have multiple half days in a week, for instance, rather than just one whole day off?
So, yes, most of our Act 80 days, the early dismissal days, students come in for a half of a day, then the other half, the teachers are there the full day, and professional development is provided for the teachers. This gives the opportunity for professional development to be kind of ongoing throughout the year. It's not just 4 days at the beginning of the school year, then you don't have any professional development. So it's really this repeated and ongoing professional development. There's a lot of requirements from the state where we don't have a choice in professional development. And so as a result of requirements from the state, the different needs that we talked about tonight in a lot of different of our different presentations that we had, there's an ongoing need to support our teachers and provide staff development, professional development. So that is the reason why the students are in for a half of a day and the teachers are in for a full day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for the question. Any additional questions? Well, thank you for that. We'll look forward to looking at this again.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is policy. There's a third reading of some policies that we've been looking at. To my knowledge, there have been no changes since the last time we looked at this as a second reading. Unless there are any further questions or comments from the board, I can call for a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any comments, questions? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. On to other educational entities. I believe we have a report from Dr. Whitney on the CLIU.
We do. We're all fresh, so let's go. CLIU board met on January 24th. This is a report from that meeting. Some of the highlights of note. There was a report of the fiscal 23 audit findings from Campbell, Rappold, and Eurosits. Happy to report a clean audit, no identified findings to correct, so that was a positive report. Second item, we saw a video and some in-person examples of a remarkable program that I want to highlight that the CLIU does, which is called the Toy Adaptation Day. So this is an annual event in December before the holidays that started 5 years ago. The IU's Assistive Technology Department works with students and teachers from LCTI and involves some IU students who have special needs themselves. And the idea here is they're taking toys and adapting them for children who may not have good mobility with their hands or dexterity to operate switches or buttons or things of that nature. So they retrofit these toys with very easy to operate, easy to activate switches. In many cases, these are 3D printed. The students really run the whole process, led by LCTI students, and they do all the wiring, soldering, sewing. They put the toys back together in their original packaging, and then there's an event at which they give out these adapted toys to kids with special needs in the IU. And it's just a remarkable program, and it's one of the real highlights this year was the Assistive Technology Department in the IU talking about involving more CLIU students in the actual technology of this and building what they're calling an inclusive maker community, and really trying to push that forward to get more and more IU students involved with making, prototyping, and using technology. So that was a really remarkable presentation and a great program. Third item, the comprehensive plan for the next 3 years, 24 through 27, was reviewed. This is the start of a essentially month-long public review period for the plan before the board will adopt it or be up for adoption by the board next month. The title of the plan is Blueprint for Continuous Improvement. That's a theme. And it was presented by Eric Leck, the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Educational Technology. Just some quick highlights of the plan. The plan is really focused on staff development, staff retention, organizational climate, which is good in many, many ways and can be improved in many others. And really retention is the big piece here, and trying to help CLIU staff find more pathways to advancing their careers, staying with the IU for multiple years, and getting the kind of professional development and professional advancement that they might want. So that is kind of the general focus of the plan, and there's a lot of steps involved in trying to get there. This was built on a whole lot of surveys done among the staff. They have an organizational climate committee that's been formed to try and ensure that the IU's climate is a positive one for all staff. And this goes to, recognizing all staff, religious and cultural demographics, and making sure that everybody feels, welcome to as an employee in the IU. So, and just shoring up their professional development plans is really a big focus. So we reviewed that. There were a few questions, and but it's a robust plan, and they've put a lot of thought into it. So positive on that. And then a couple quick items in addition, personnel items. We approved 3 new occupational therapists and also a new behavioral health technician position. These are positions in high demand. I actually didn't realize this, but apparently some local colleges and universities have discontinued certified occupational therapy assistant programs due to lack of enrollment. So there's a real there's a real demand for qualified occupational therapists, and the IU continues to grow their need in that area. So they're trying to. So we approved 3 new positions, and hopefully they're able to fill them, to fill those needs. And likewise with the behavioral health services program, it's just an increased need, and so we approved a new position there. And one more personnel note, the IU started a student intern program, which I think is really fantastic. Currently, they have an LCTI mechanic student interning with the CLIU's transportation department. And the hopes is that this provides, and they want to expand that and maybe get 2 to 3 other such interns in various areas of the IU, again, as a sort of staff retention and development plan. So that's a positive development. And then finally, we reapproved our 6-month health and safety plan as required by law, with no substantive changes from any of the previous plans. That's my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Whitney. Are there any questions or comments on his report? Did a nice job for 3+ hours.
For being fresh, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to item B, appointment of CLIU board member. It's my pleasure to report that Dr. Whitney has graciously expressed his interest in continuing in the role it would be a 3-year term starting on July 1st, going 2024 through June 30, 2027. If there are no others interested, I would like to have a motion to nominate Dr. Whitney for this position. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, will please call the roll?
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Dr. Whitney?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen, and thank you, Dr. Whitney.
Thank you.
Lastly, under other educational entities is the LCTI report. In lieu of Mr. Smith not being here, I'm going to ask Mr. Jankowski to provide a report on our last meeting.
Thank you, and I am very happy to close out this wonderful evening. Despite his absence, Mr. Smith did still prepare the report, so I want to give him literary credit here so as not to plagiarize. So the Joint Operating Committee of LCTI met on January 24th. As Dr. Campbell mentioned, it is Career and Technical Education Month. During our January meeting, we opened by learning about a new service award called the Bison Award, which is given to a staff member of one of the sending districts in celebration of service to others in the community. This inaugural award was given to Kelly Brassetti. She is the Parkland girls cross-country coach, as well as an educator at LCTI. And Kelly saved the life of a man who was suffering a heart attack in the Lehigh Parkway back in October while her cross-country team was conducting practice. It was an extremely moving story. The Morning Call actually did a really nice article about her last year too. So they're not sure there's a more deserving person for the inaugural award. We also received a detailed presentation about the Future Educators Program, which looks to support our LCTI students who have an interest in moving into teaching after they graduate, which is, again, a fabulous program for future educators. Regarding adult workforce education, the administration shared how they hope to expand upon a previously awarded $30,000 grant from the state after using most of those funds. Demand across the state for this grant has fallen, so that's left LCTI with a strong potential to increase the grant up to a total of $75,000. The National Technical Honor Society held their induction in January, where they inducted 130 students. And as we look to the budget season, the LCTI again shared their breakdown of costs in the budget, which is divided based on average daily membership. With a 5.3% increase in membership this year, East Penn now accounts for 12.3% of the LCTI budget. So I think this is one of those rare situations where it's actually good that our budget's increasing because we're really getting more traction from our students, and hopefully that number continues to grow. Finally, on January 17th, directors and leaders of the Pennsylvania Principals Association, Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, PSBA, and the Pennsylvania Intermediary Unit spoke to the House Education Committee about the current challenges surrounding students' mental health. As president-elect of the PA Association of Career and Technical Administrators, Dr. Greenewalt shared her experience during the hearing, where she was able to speak directly to the challenges she sees from students in our region. She felt it was productive and an excellent opportunity to provide insight to policymakers into this ongoing need in our schools. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jankowski. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Again, appreciate you stepping in on Mr. Smith's behalf. There are no other items. Moving on to announcements, we held an executive session this evening where we talked about personnel and confidential matters. The district will be closed on February 19th and on our President's Day. Our next regular board meeting will be on Monday, February 26th at 7:30 in this room. And with no further business, I'd like to get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Good evening, and thank you for keeping at it.